Hello and welcome to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places from Times Gone By. It's 2 episodes knitted together of this podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, and between us we have to see if we can agree on the best things about it.
My name's Ed Stradling, and I'm a factual TV producer who's done a lot of work on the DVDs of Doctor Who. Including, and this is not something I thought about, Toby, when I chose Resurrection of the Daleks, but of course I worked on the Resurrection of the Daleks DVD with you. It didn't occur to me because it wasn't a kind of making of or retrospective documentary as such about the serial that we made. It was a program about the actors, of course. We spent a few days traipsing around Chiswick and Shad Thames and the theatre in Birmingham. In the summer of 2010 for that, I can't remember what it was called. What was it called? Casting Far and Wide, I think the feature was called, that we made together. But I'd forgotten about that, actually, and it was only when I was watching the episodes that, of course, it reminded me that we'd done it. So I've chosen Resurrection of the Daleks. It probably isn't one of my very favourite serials, which I think is slightly underrated in recent years. I think it was probably correctly rated in its first few years as being a very good serial, perhaps not one of the very best. That's, I think, where it belongs. In recent years it's become a bit less popular, but it's definitely from the era which hooked me into the show. The last Davison season really was the season when I stopped just watching it and enjoying it, and if I missed an episode, who cares, really. That was the series when I mustn't miss an episode, and by the end of the series I was recording it with the intention of keeping the tape. But I've chosen it more because of a reason which I won't go into, because it gives away one of my favourite things about it, and you have to guess that as I understand it.
Well, hello everybody, and hello Ed Stradling, who I haven't seen for ages. It was lovely to hear Ed's voice. I really like Ed. He was somebody that when I lived in London I very much enjoyed socialising with. He was one of my close social circle, but neither of us are there now. He's gone back to Wales and I am back in Manchester. But yes, I would go to the theatre with Ed and with my friend Simon Harries, and they're quite a different pair, Ed and Simon, and between them made for excellent company on our theatre trips. And I was introduced to Ed by Rob Shearman, I think, originally, but I already knew his work because he'd made Putting the Shock into Earthshock for the Doctor Who DVDs, and I'd known him from his posts on the Restoration Team website, so I knew who he was, and then I met him and then became very friendly with him, and he's a friend of mine still, but I don't see him often enough. In fact, no, wasn't the first time I met him, or the first time I spent any proper time with him, I went, it was in Bath. I went to see Steve O'Brien, and Steve, Ed and I watched some stuff on the telly at Steve's flat, actually. Maybe that was the first time I met Ed. I forget, but anyway, Steve also great company, great lad. Interesting. It was just when I was getting used to sort of being in and around London, and the fact that I could nip to Bath and I could, meet these people, because Steve's words I'd read a lot in SFX magazine before I ever met him. I still see them as the sort of cool kids of the class, because they worked on the range and in the media and all that sort of thing. And I was never, as I say, I always felt slightly distanced from, sort of people who worked in the world of Doctor Who and or science fiction, criticism, writing, program making. I was a consumer, and Ed was one of the first to employ me. It wasn't the first documentary I made, but it was the first sort of serious one, I think, for the range, Casting Far and Wide, and it was because it was about actors, and that was very much my thing. I was the actor guy then. Now I seem to be the cookbook and sad bits, dead people guy. I think I'm the cheap guy who can do a bit to camera in one take so that we can move on and make sure this very low budget film comes in on time and on budget. I think I'm that guy. But anyway, we did Casting Far and Wide, which was actor based, because Ed said, I want to do one, because if I do a making of, you have to, you've got 6 or 7 interviews, you have to take a sentence from each interview to illustrate each point. So every section of the program, you're having to go through each interview. Whereas if you just take 5 actors and do their story from beginning to end, you just have to cut one interview and sort of as you go, really. So it's a much quicker and easier edit. So that's why he chose to do that. And we looked at who we could do. We thought we were going to get Rula Lenska, but her agent couldn't really be bothered for the amount of money that we were paying. I thought it was maybe because Rula was a bit too grand, but Rula has actually stayed in this house and did an interview for me for free. But it didn't even get to Rula. It didn't get past her agent, who couldn't really be bothered with it. I think that's what happened there. So we tried juggling with a few people. Didn't get, because Rodney Bewes was still around at that point. We had everyone to choose from, apart from Maurice Colburn, of course. So it was a juggle, and we didn't know. And then eventually we got this lineup. It looked like we were going to have, very much the supporting cast. So I was very pleased when we got Del Henney, who I think is wonderful and became a friend of mine, but then gave me a great amount of guilt about how his contribution to the documentary turned out. But we'll maybe talk about that when we do it. But anyway, yes, Casting Far and Wide on the Resurrection of the Daleks special edition was a documentary right up my street, and was great to do, because Ed makes great documentaries. There are aspects of my contribution to it that I'm not happy with, and one that I'm really, really unhappy with, that seemed great at the time, but I laid any faults at my door there, not Ed's. I also seem to recall I wore a shirt that I wore quite a lot at that time, that I think I wore so much that I remember putting it on once and its sleeve coming off. It frayed away. Shame. And that had been a Christmas present for my then wife. I liked that shirt. I get sentimental about everything. I miss that shirt. It was a good shirt. Oh well, gone now. At least I wore it until it dropped. Anyway, Resurrection of the Daleks. I'm watching the 2-parter of Resurrection of the Daleks, because that is how it was broadcast. I thought, just as I was about to set this up, oh God, I'm going to have to plug in the DVD player and this sort of thing, because I want to watch the 2-part version. But BritBox has the 2-part version as broadcast. Well done, BritBox. I do have the DVD, the original edition and the special edition. So, but I'm watching it as it was broadcast. So I first saw this all in one day. Did I? Yeah, I think I did, because our local vicar, videoed Doctor Who for us, and I went to watch it at his on a Sunday, because we didn't have a video, and it was what we did of our Sundays, was for me to catch up on the Doctor Who I was missing, because I was packed away to the local school. It wasn't far away, but it was one where I had to sleep over during the week, because my mum was at work, and she got up from too early to go to work and came back too late from work for me to be able to do normal school hours. So, woe is me. So, but I got to see. So I watched this one Sunday afternoon like a kind of movie, and especially because it was already, chopped together, because it was, episodes 1 and 2 became episode 1, and episodes 3 and 4 became episode 2. So it was a 2-parter as a throw forward to what later happened, because obviously this and this always does feel slightly more epic. I mean, its content gives it that as well, but the fact that that's how I consumed it made it feel a bit. It is anomalous, because it's 2 feature-length episodes. It was only because of accident of scheduling, but nonetheless, that's how it always has kind of felt to me. And I have had it in various iterations since. I did then get it as a 4-parter on a bootleg, and episode 3 was the one with no incidental music on it, or incomplete sound effects and stuff like that. So I've had various bits and bobs of it, but this to me is this is the version I watched as a kid. I probably watched it more since, because I had it on video. I had the VHS as well, in 4-episode form, and that seems to now be the default for everybody, because that's how it was made, of course. But I am watching the version that was broadcast on BBC television and so the original iteration of Resurrection of the Daleks, and that's how I think I've instructed Ed to do it. If I get to the end of this, and he goes, right, episode 1, I go, of 4, and I go, oh no. But I'm sure it's a long time ago since he did this, but I'm sure that's what we'd agreed. I'm slightly kicking myself for that now because I've just done a new series episode, which are 50 minutes, and I've got scheduled next some new series episodes, and I was looking forward to doing this because, you know, in terms of content production, if you know, one podcast only requires 25 minutes of commentary, that's less work for me to do than a podcast that, you know, where one episode is 50 minutes of commentary. But that's my problem. So that click is me flicking through the menu on BritBox to get to 8th of February 1984. It says 46 minutes, Resurrection of the Daleks. Davros is held captive aboard a prison in space, but the Daleks launch a rescue attempt. Oh, there's so much to say about this violent Dalek-y Doctor Who bloodbath that we are going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. So here we go. Resurrection of the Daleks. This story became a guilty pleasure of mine for a while. I actually don't agree with guilty pleasures now. Why should you worry that you like something because of the disapproval of some imagined external commentators? If I like something, I like it. And you know, you can like something whilst it not necessarily being good in inverted commas. Not that I don't think this isn't good. Although I think this has problems, but I forgive it for most of them because it does lots of things that I like, but they are things I might like as a sort of guilty pleasure. I maybe like some of this without necessarily approving of it. I love this opening shot, and I remember this feeling so... Although, funny enough, when I revisited this as an older person, I remember, you know, coming into it thinking it would be this great gritty thing, and then seeing some of the flaws in the sort of grittiness, that they're not executed perhaps as well as I'd remembered, or just because they're in, you know, a program that is suitable for children. It's not, you know, it's not going to be the Wild Bunch or Aliens or whatever. But this is about as close as you get. That's Winston from EastEnders. Winston, the market stall holder, is one of the escaping prisoners. I always like Winston and Brig Ron, especially when they got a line, because they were extras who would occasionally have a bit of the limelight. I think I love this. It's very Doctor Who-y thing of the escape convicts are all, I think, in reject or standby Doctor Who costumes. And I remember my brother watching this and going, you know, they're just single shots or whatever. But actually, that doesn't look like that there. And I know that the tramp gets in some stick for the way that he dies there. But that's an horrific idea. You open on what you think is a sort of, you know, just an ordinary Joe who's going to observe something and go, "Ooh, on my oath," and run away or whatever. But instead, he sees some policemen gun down a load of people escaping from a warehouse, and then they turn and shoot him. I mean, that's grim and gruesome, and as a kid, I absolutely loved it. I don't think it's particularly unsuitable for children. I mean, I think it's pretty close to the line. I mean, it's tame by today's standard. That's not a bad shot of the spaceship as well, and it moves. It moves without that sort of judderiness of some of the 70s spaceships. There's a slight slowdown here, isn't there, where... I think a boom was going to go into boom went into shot. So I think on their exit, the movement slows down, because a boom went into shot. But that's because it's very ambitious. I love the way they have to duck to go through the door, because it's not their spaceship. It's a Dalek spaceship. So they're too tall for it. That was Maurice Colburn as Lytton and Roger Davenport as Trooper. I always feel sorry for Roger because he actually gets quite a lot to do. He's sort of Lytton's second in command, but he doesn't get a name. Now, I would have sort of said, can I not be called, you know, Klein or something. Why did I think? Oh, 'cause that's what Colbert's called in Gangsters. And I love the fact that these costumes are all a bit dirty. You know, they've given some thought to that. There's the change between film and video isn't too stark here because the colours are sort of beige and muted still. The shadows are lovely here. Matthew Robinson shoots all this very well. He is the right director for this. I think this is his first Doctor Who, and he's the brother of Tom Robinson, isn't he? Who sang "Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay." And then later went on to be the producer of Biker Grove. I've never met... He lived in Cambodia for ages, I think, Matthew Robinson. He's one of the few sort of key Who people I've not had the pleasure of meeting or interviewing, but he's on his DVDs, so, you know, I'm always feel less of a sort of need to mop somebody up if they've already contributed elsewhere. I like to think of myself as sort of grabbing the people that we've not had sometimes. And of course, Galloway is called Galloway. That's a nod to Death to the Daleks. You know, Eric Saywood was not afraid of nodding back to past glories. So we have Galloway here, and we have Styles later. A rodent, instead of saying a rat or a mouse, is quite a Saywoodism, where people say an unnecessarily not florid is the wrong word. He's trying to make. I don't think that shot quite works either. The close up of William Slay, it doesn't quite work. It's an odd. It's a moment of the direction that I think is slightly fluffed, which is a shame because as I say, I think Robinson's direction is very good. William Slay is an excellent actor, National Theatre actor. I've had the pleasure of meeting William a couple of times, and he's a very nice guy. Wonderful voice, very tall, great presence. He'd kept his letter that he'd got from Matthew or from John Nathan Turner, I think, saying, you know, well done, nice one. This is a nice shot of Lytton as well over his. See, that's not a trooper, is it? That's a second in command, or at least an ADC. You know, ADC. Great. Maurice Colburn is absolutely fantastic, and nice red lighting on his face there. I'd absolutely loved him from Day of the Triffids, where he was the character who had a bit of sort of righteous fury, Jack Coker. So that's what I knew him from, because I was too young to remember Gangsters, I think, which is a series and of course he then went on to be in Howard's Way, which was a huge success, but sadly he passed away while he was making it. Otherwise it'd have been a massive... Well, I mean, he was a well-known TV face. Here's Rula Lenska with her marvellous hair all bunched up. I mean, she's got such lustrous, long, beautiful hair, Rula. But I think she's great in this. She speaks Saywood's sort of terse language with the requisite bite. And I actually like this. I think Eric Saywood often wants to be Robert Holmes or Douglas Adams and isn't as good as either. But I do and I think the things that he realizes that he likes are things that I like, sort of cynical characters. That, you know, the thing here with the ship door not opening and Styles being a bit pissed off, and you know, Mercer who comes on the ship as the guy, you know, who's a bit of a sort of do-gooder, but he's a bit of a square, but he wants to do the right thing, and actually he ends up getting sort of busted by the captain, who is a great character who we don't actually see, which I rather like as well. And I don't mind Saywood's sort of snarky, cynical characters, because that to me as a kid seemed very, very grown up, and it buys you sort of grown up points without having to do, you know, violence or swearing or any of those sorts of things. So I kind of liked all that, and I still like it. I understand people who don't like it, who prefer their Doctor Who to be a bit more fantastical and a bit more sparky and a bit more fun. I totally get that, but I did find a lot of this era as a kid quite beige. You know, lots of wandering through, you know, spaceships talking about science or whatever. And to me, you know, soldiers and guns and fighting and people dying and you know, people being grim and futuristic, all was all very much what I as a 10-year-old Doctor Who fan wanted my show to be. People have complained that they pull up in a van, the military, but if they're wanting to go there incognito, I don't see why that's an issue. People, there's another bit later on that I remember my brother sort of guffawing at, and me just going, why has that even entered your sphere of reference and taken you out of the story? I love the fact that these guys are smoking. That made me feel very grown up. Very rare occasions of people smoking in Doctor Who, and this is one of them. This is Sneh Gupta, who I didn't interview in Casting Far and Wide, and because of that, when I was doing Who's Round, I wanted to get somebody that I didn't have a contact for, and I was very proud of the fact that Sneh, who I think had showed an interest in Casting Far and Wide but lives in India, she'd agreed to do it, and we did it by Skype. I've since met her. And she's great. She's absolutely beautiful. She was a sort of TV face at the time. I think she did some episodes of Blankety Blank. She was somebody who appeared as herself. She was being sort of groomed for, becoming a face at a time when, multicultural faces started to sort of be proactively sought, and rightly so, because the TV landscape was, so one colour, as it were, and this. Matthew Robinson's decision to cast a very multi-racial crew of the spaceship because it's the future. I mean, that has become a sort of cliched shorthand to an optimistic view of the future where color is not a bar, and we are you have people in key positions who are played by actors of color and all of that sort of thing. But at the time, this was a little bit different, and I actually like. I also like, and I think he's taken his cue from Alien, Eric Saywood there, and Robinson as well. That that you're not always manning a thing and entering warp drive and doing this. Sometimes, like you do at work, you're sitting around having a fag, waiting for something to happen. And I like all of that, and the lighting in this ship is excellent. So I think this feels like Doctor Who that can sometimes be a bit sparkly or a bit tinsely, or can sometimes be a bit sort of beige and ponderous, is doing sort of this is what they wanted Warriors of the Deep to look like, and it doesn't, because it's white and bright. This looks absolutely terrific. I'm loving the lighting here, and this this is also fantastic that we've got we're hearing from a very small number of people, and the kind of ship is being taken over via noises off. She's being told what's happening for engineering. He's about to tell us that we're defensive, and he's right back at the back of the set and has come forward, and the camera's come through the two people that we're favouring at the front. I always think that's a bit of a mimsy laser. They're acting their socks off here. The lighting's doing loads of work. Everyone's throwing themselves about, and there's two little sort of pencil thin laser beams that don't seem to be doing any damage to the model. It's that's just the restrictions of the time, but it's odd that the fancy bit, the laser beam, is doing less work than the actors, but that's Doctor Who. I know people don't like lines like "your bile would be better directed against the enemy Doctor." I mean, when I say it out loud, there it is a very bad line. But and Jim Findlay, who's an actor, he was up for the role of the monk in the head monk in Tooth and Claw. He told me, because he does a bit of he does a bit of those martial arts. Jim, nice guy. I interviewed him for Casting Far and Wide, and he's one of those actors that just kept going. But he's in Cry Freedom, isn't he? He's had a really interesting career. And I was actually quite pleased that when we went to do the interview, he knew who I was, because he's a bit like me. He'll read names in the Radio Times and stuff, so he knew that I'd written and been in radio plays. So it was then really annoying, because at the end of on camera, he then goes, where we go, and he says, and he's means to go Toby, and he goes Terry, and they go Toby, and so it looks like he doesn't even know what I'm called, and actually, which is fine, because why should he? But the truth is that he actually not only knew what I was called, he sort of knew my work and everything else like that. But it doesn't look like that in the film. And that's always really bothered me, even though it's only a thing that I would notice, and perhaps somebody who wanted to do me down and would go, see, he's called Terry, no, but I like the bit of smoke on the when the model docks, just a little piece of attention to detail like that. I like this, where people sort of have to. It's a botched. You can only do. It's obvious that these guys are having to do the heavy lifting here, and it's not making the right noise. But I like all of that stuff where futuristic technology needs a kick, needs a helping hand. It's not all slick, and like our technology today, it may be stuff that to people in the 70s it would have looked slick and space age, but we still have to switch things off and on again, or unplug them or recalibrate them. Or I think even the most marvelous and most modern things don't quite work, need a bit of a hand. Admire the way that Mark Strickson is always looking behind him furtively, which is wonderful because it adds to the tension and it gives him something to do in scenes where he hasn't got any lines. But it also means he knows where the camera is and he's getting his face in shot every time. I think Turlough is a great character. I think having the companion trying to kill the Doctor is a really neat and smart idea. It did end up causing them a few problems and restrictions in what they could do with him, but I think Strickson was excellent casting. I think Turlough being this slightly shifty character, whose moral compass is not necessarily always pointing in the same direction as the Doctor's, is really good. Now, this guy who gets a line here, he says okay, or whatever. I managed to find it. Ben Cook was looking to track some of these actors down when he was doing an article to tie in with It's a Sin, because even though the It's a Sin main character was sort of based on Dursley McClendon, they liked the aesthetic of this Dalek story for when they were doing their recreation of a Doctor Who story that he could have been in. And so those costumes were reproduced and everything. So I actually helped Ben. He said, "Do you know where any of these extras are?" And this guy's a travel writer now, this guy that's just been killed. And I was quite pleased that I actually did go, I think it's this guy. And Ben got in touch and spoke to him. So that was an article written by somebody else that has nothing to do with me, but I just had a little hand in. And I like the fact that that there are little bits. My DNA is can be traced. Well, it can be now because I've said it out loud. But on things that weren't necessarily things that were my projects or I actually had anything really to do with. But apart from giving a little bit of a helping hand. But the contents of the article and everything were still a total surprise to me when I got it, because I was, as I say, it was just pointing Ben in a certain direction. And to the extent that I actually can't even remember that guy's name, but I did at the time. I think I identified him for Ben, and maybe one of the others as well. A while ago now, but because that's something that would just happen in an afternoon, and then I'd forget about, and only remember when doing something like this, and wanting to go. I've done things, What do we think about Rodney Bewes'? I mean, I think Rodney Bewes is interesting casting. They approached Mel Smith, interestingly enough, who I think would have been a really interesting. That's interesting. I've said twice. I think Bewes is a bold choice. I always found him a slightly strange actor because he has that slightly sort of hollow, flat delivery that is part of his speech pattern. It's not wooden acting, but it does give his performances a certain sort of flatness and tone. And I think the stutter is an interesting addition and helps him then convey the sort of conflicted nature of it. Well, early on it's supposed to suggest that he's a bit nervous, and then later on it helps him suggest his inner conflict. But it's a hard thing to do. I have not normally when I'm performing, although I can. I'm probably flattering myself. I go when I'm performing. My diction is absolutely flawless, but I'm better than I was. I've had to teach myself to speak a bit because I had bad R's and I love this. Is really gruesome. This and it's never quite explained what this is, but they release this gas that makes people's faces melt. And again, it's just a real thing. Watching that as a kid, you're going, "Oh, this isn't that thing with slow lumbering monsters from pantomime sea monster from 3 weeks ago where people died and didn't bleed and stuff. This is absolutely grim." And I like the fact that these two go off and have their mission. And John Adam Baker, I remember him cropping up in an episode of The Bill, and I think a couple of mates of mine have tracked him down and chatted to him. So everyone's and he was somebody that I think we would have gone for with the casting far and wide had we not got the 5 that we got. But yes, so I can be known to stammer as well, but generally not when I'm performing. But I think it's a hard thing to pretend to do, and I'm not sure that Rodney Bewes is great at pretending to stammer. And I do think he is perhaps. I think he is perhaps the weakest performance in it. Even though I can see why they cast him, and he's a good name to be casting. I'm also maybe coloured by the fact that when I interviewed everybody for casting Far and Wide, everyone went, all the actors were nice, but Rodney Bewes wasn't. And I've had a couple of friends who've met him who said he was perfectly affable, but I also know, I know a few people who had stories where they found him to be not pleasant. An actor that was a very good friend of mine, worked with him on a play, and who said that, on the first day went up and talked to him because they both, I think, had bicycles, and Rodney Bewes just sort of looked at him and walked away. And then a bit later he came up to him and said, yes, I'm sorry about before, but I don't do small talk. And my friend was just like, well, sod you then. So yeah, maybe my view of Bewes is coloured by the fact that, and another actor that I know who that I worked with, I had great respect for. I remember once going, this business, most people in this business are great, but and then he listed 3 people, one of whom was Rodney Bewes, and then he called them a word that I can't say before the watershed. And I thought, well, if so and so doesn't like you, then because he's a good guy, he's a good guy, and wears his status as I think a national treasure pretty lightly. But he didn't like Bewes. He didn't like Peter Bowles, and he didn't like one other person. Can't remember who it was. It's his diction is, whereas Del Henney, I think, is wonderful. And in fact, Del said that Rodney Bewes had come up to him and said, "Are you going to play it like that?" And Del could get a bit snarky about things, but Del was actually a very nervous and a very humble man for an actor who has, I think, great control and a propensity to do very good understated menace. What I like about his Colonel is that, because Del was working class background, he was a Scouser from a working class area of Liverpool, is that he doesn't try and play it posh. I mean, he does the sort of RP, but I think a lesser actor would stand upright and make him stiffer, whereas actually a lot of those genuinely up and class colonels would roll their sleeves up and have their hands in the pockets because they wear their status sort of lightly and casually. I love this. I think it's really grim. The fact that he's got fingers melted. And again, they don't really sort of bother explaining what that is. It's this sort of gas booby trap thing. And the fact that she has to kill her mate is really... And then, she's... I remember my brother watching this and sort of saying, "Oh, why is she not doing anything?" But I think it's to stage it, to give it a bit of climax. She shoots the first one, but then she realizes she's outnumbered and she kind of bottles it like you would in a dream, or I think now when I got the version the first bootleg version I got on video, maybe from Australia or maybe it had been put together. This was the cliffhanger. This was where it went to the end of episode 1. Release Davros, whereas, and I like that mask. Did Michael Wisher say it looked like a frustrated Ina Sharples? But I like it. I like the black lips. And I love. In fact, I love all these actors. Called Philip McGough was in loads of things. Sergeant Calder. We tried to get him for casting Far and Wide because he was in Doctors at the time, but I think he was leaving Doctors that week. I was really disappointed not to get Philip McGough, and I think every time somebody's tried to interview him, he's demurred. Sergeant Calder, and again, I like him as well because they're not playing soldiers. They convince me as soldiers, but they're not doing, he hasn't done I'm a gruff sergeant, and he's and I like the fact that they've sort of augmented their costumes a little bit. So he's turned a bit of wepping into a sort of kerchief, which means that then when we get the the false versions later, they've got rid of those sort of personal touches to the costumes, and I quite like that. So the Dalek appearing is, of course, the end of the actual episode 1, which was, so I saw that for the first time when the first DVD came out, which came in a rubber case. I still have that. I think I still have the rubber case, even though I've taken it off because my display has to have the display, although it's been replaced by the special the special edition. Now that Dalek, if you look close, is a bit knackered when it goes out the window, but I didn't notice that the first time. Oh, and I think there was a picture of Davison in the alleyway here in the Radio Times in the back pages, I think there was. But that that pushing the Dalek out and the explosion, that's a great bit of Doctor Who. So I really like Del Henney and Philip McGough as soldiers in this, because they're not doing soldier acting, but I still believe in them as soldiers, because I've met soldiers who are sort of like that. I have equally met soldiers who are stiff and bolt and upright and that, but either approach is legitimate. I think the more traditional approach, the latter approach, is the one that we are more used to in Doctor Who, which is why I find McGough and Henney very refreshing. And McGough was also in Monocled Mutineer, in which he's the guy that's tracking down Paul McGann, and he was in Brookside as Alan Rothwell's heroin addict supplier, facilitator, mate. So Philip McGough was on telly quite a lot at this time, and I've since seen him pop up, saw him in an episode of Ultimate Force where he'd got like 2 lines, and I was like, what's happened to Philip McGough? And then he was a regular in Doctors, and so you go, so he's up. I mean, that Casting Far and Wide documentary, he would have been perfect for that, because it sort of shows the ups and downs. And I think Del said does he make furniture or something? He does have another business outside of being an actor as well. He's an actor that I really like, but he's maybe one on my list of ones that got away, because I've never quite been able to speak to him, which is a shame, because he's certainly, I would say, one of those faces. And he's brilliant in an episode of Nightingales, which is a sitcom I like a lot. I love the grim mute. This is as close as you can get for Saturday tea time. Now, I suppose the suggestion is that even though Turlough can smell it, it's dissipated enough because he doesn't die, I guess. But again, the viewer who wanted to sort of be on the lookout for things would go, well, why isn't it sort of melted bits of Turlough's face, and why does having a handkerchief save him? So here is Davros. I used to be very cross that Michael Wisher had missed out on playing Davros, because I love Michael Wisher's Davros. But actually, I think Terry Malloy's Davros is superb as well. They're slightly different versions of the same character, but I like Terry's sort of calculating, sort of occasionally purred, whispered characterization. I like the way Philip McGough says he's dead as well. He's quite avuncular. He's sort of pragmatic. He's straightforward, but he doesn't over dramatize it. I think they're on the same wavelength here, Del Henney and Philip McGough. I believe them as part of the same unit. I really like these army scenes. They sort of feel, even though they've got Chloe Ashcroft, who I'm afraid, and it's terrible because as an actor, you don't want people to sort of dismiss you because they know you from something else. But Chloe Ashcroft, who has that particular way of saying things as well, she says ambulance. She has got the voice of a children's TV presenter, or maybe I think it's the voice of a children's TV presenter because she was a children's TV presenter, because she was a regular on Play School, playing with Hamble and I mean some fine actors who've had great dramatic pedigree have done stuff on Play School. Wasn't Colin Jevons a Play School presenter? And Derek Griffiths was a Play School presenter and is a marvelous actor, both straight and comic. But I think it's Chloe Ashcroft's voice, and because her diction reminds me so much of the stuff that she did on Play School, that I can never quite believe in Professor Laird as a character. She's the woman from Play School, especially as she has to say later ambulance, or she already said it. But that's no reason not to cast somebody, and I'm sure that for a modern audience who don't have that that recognition, she's just an actress playing the part. I love I love Dell here. I think Colonel Archer has such a sort of warmth and an ease and a natural authority. And you know, that body language that he has, he's not doing that stiff backed thing. But you know, he's not had much screen time, Colonel Archer, but you really like him, and I like the fact that he gives his done to the Doctor, and he's kind of trusted him, and he has such a natural sort of innate authority that makes you feel warmly towards the character, because you go, yeah, he's smart. Of course he trusts the Doctor, because we know the Doctor's the hero, and he's smart enough to know the Doctor's the hero. And Mike Mungarvin is the other. He's smoking a fag, is the guy that's just chucked the fag away. Mike had played a Dalek in Destiny of the Daleks. He's not credited in this as this trooper. He's a non-speaking supporting artist, but he's a featured one because he's about to get attacked by the green Khalid mutant. And I think they make a great virtue of the Dalek. It's making the Daleks really scary again. I mean, one wonders how they picked up the wreckage of the Daleks and didn't notice the sort of green mutating thing moving about inside it, but maybe they just all put a blanket round it and carried it up without looking. A glass of cool spring mountain water. I've used that with my tongue firmly in my cheek in a radio link once. I'm not wild about the guns. I can see what because the amount of shooting that there is, you can't be sort of matching up laser beams at different camera angles. They're really hard to do, and they'd have ended up looking shit because they would have had to have sort of come out at funny angles in order to hit the people in the right places. We've all seen examples of that in Doctor Who, but I think I don't know. I'm not wild about the lighting up and the sound effect isn't quite right for me. It is a part of the story that I remember when I watched it back as a sort of grown up, having been very excited by it as a kid. That it was one of the chinks in its armor, I do like Sergeant. I love Sergeant Calder as well. I think Philip McGough's great. He's got a lovely sort of gentleness about him, and again, he's he's a sort of decent sort. And I like that shot as well. I wish he was lying at a slightly different angle from his gun. It looks like Mike Mungarvin and his gun have sort of both been laid down by a prop person because they're exactly parallel to each other and exactly straight. And I think it would just look slightly better if they were a bit more skew-if. So that's Mike Mungarvin, who's he gets a credit actually in Trial of a Time Lord as a duty officer, and he's credited in Destiny of the Daleks. But he's a regular supporting artiste, Mike Mungarvin, who did good work for Doctor Who late 70s and all through the early 80s. He's very haughty, isn't he? He's slightly more. He's a bit less clipped, Terry, and a bit more haughty and slightly full of himself, puffed up as Davros. But he's a great character, Davros. It's a good mask. I prefer the Wisher mask. I think the blasted out eyes are slightly more organic to the Wisher mask, which isn't quite as sort of ridged and masky, and I think the eye is more subtle on the Friedlander Wisher mask. But I still think the Davros is a great visual, and Terry Malloy gives a great characterization, and the Dalek-y man is a superb idea, and it gives an extra dimension to the Daleks. Davison's great at this. I mean, it is slightly awkward seeing the Doctor holding a gun. So this is the last we see of Colonel Archer as Colonel Archer. He's obviously about to be replaced, but this, and of course this is still episode 1, even though it's episode 2. But watching this as it went out, we've still only met these characters this week, and I love this little wave that he does. That's a typical lovely Dell touch of going, again, in real life, that's what somebody would do. In a fictional version, they would do a salute or stand up. But these are guys that he's seeing sort of semi-colleagues, and this is a real irony of going, it's dead. well, and then we see the gun. So are you. And there's something about it being a silencer as well that is really, really grim. And they're going to shoot him in the head. It's really horrible. I will talk about Del, I'm sure. Del and I became friendly as a result of casting Far and Wide, where I was haunted by what we'd done in the documentary, because he revealed that he wasn't particularly happy with his lot. When I'd gone into it thinking, he was one of the biggest names in the cast, and he was still working, and he sort of revealed that he hadn't earned a living as an actor for 10 years, and he was actually selling flowers in Fulham. And he didn't wear it well either. He was a bit of a glass half empty person, Del, even though when you warmed him up, he was, he had a great pesky Scouse humour. He was a mixture of sort of very self-deprecating, but also occasionally quite sort of terse and downbeat as well. But then, as I say, had this sort of pesky sense of fun and was very empowering. He came to see Moths. He used to send me lovely emails about saying, when are you going to write your book about the profession, Maestro? And he sent me a lovely email after Moths. And in fact, that made me pluck up the courage to go and see him, because I'd been worried that in the documentary, where Ed had left out of the edit that he did first, the bit where Del was really down about the end of his career, and I said, no, we've got to put that in. He said it, he wanted to say it, and this is a documentary about the ups and downs of being an actor. So Ed then put it back in, and we recorded another link to sort of emphasize that point. And then, of course, it came out, and a lot of people said, God, Del Henley cuts quite a sad figure. I thought, God, and that's my fault, really, because he needn't have done, because nobody would have known that wouldn't have been there. So triumphant. I mean, I think I prefer Wisher's shouting, because it is a bit more clipped and electronic, and I sort of buy it as being part of the last vestige of the Dalek. The crossover between the human and the Dalek, because when Wisher shouts, it is a sort of it's like he's becoming a Dalek, whereas when Terry shouts, it's a bit more sort of megalomaniac shouting. He does it very well, but I think I rationalise it slightly more the way that Wisher does it. The way that Wisher does it, he is the sort of missing link between man and Dalek, whereas when Terry rants, it's not like a Dalek. It's like a shouting megalomaniac. Does that make sense? And I'm only saying that because I'm trying to think why. Because I love Terry Malloy's Davros, but I love it more now than I did then. But I think that was only partially because my mindset then was, if it's old, it's good. So therefore, obviously, the Davros that was Davros before I was born is going to be the best Davros. And I think Michael Wisher is absolutely amazing. But Michael Wisher can be absolutely amazing, and that take nothing away from Terry Malloy, who I think is cunning and menacing and arrogant, and really his Davros, that is. And I think it's an excellent characterization, especially if you know Terry, who is an avuncular, charming, jolly, slightly silly chap. And of course, we have Leslie Grantham here as Kiston. He gets no credit on this episode, because this episode has the closing credits for episode 1, because most of the characters are in episode 1, so you'd have lost the credits for Sneh Gupta and John Adam Baker and those guys, and William Slay, if you'd had the closing credits for episode 2. So they put the closing credits for episode 1 on the end of this episode, which means that Les Grantham does not get a credit, but he goes on to be... It's an odd scream he gives there as well. It's not as bad as Chubbs in Robots of Death. But Les Grantham, has just... he has a Doctor Who link, because he'd been in prison. This is well known. He'd been in prison for murder. He'd served his time. He'd been in the army, and he'd shot a German taxi driver, the circumstances of which I still don't quite understand. But he'd served quite a stretch, but whilst in prison had showed an aptitude for drama, and had drama lessons with the help of Louise Jameson and Pamela Salem, Rachel from Remembrance of Daleks, Toos from the Robots of Death, and I think they both then helped him get some sort of rehabilitation when he came out and get away into the acting profession. And I think he was offered Galloway or Kiston, and sensibly realised that you get more episodes if fewer lines as Kiston. I love this. This is, I mean, it's all a cliche. The cat, and the quiet. Oh, what's happening? Where is it? Something under the. But that's cliches are there for a reason, and Doctor Who Doctor Who does, they're cliches from other things, and I mean that's you can see that's very powerful, isn't it? But you're also being asked to go, yeah, but it's not making any holes in the blankets. But actually just the fact that the blanket is moving about under the barrages is enough. It's a Doctor Who version of machine gun fire, and I think it's pretty harsh, even though if you wanted to look at it critically, you could. I like the way Davison sort of passes the gun over as though he doesn't really like holding it, but he was kind of enjoying holding it before, and he shoots into that blanket without much problem. It's very much he doesn't resist the Saywoodisms, although which pulls me in a couple of different directions, because as I say, I quite like the sort of macho-y stuff. It makes my show that I was watching as a kid and moving into teenage times, and being not wanting to be seen as a kid. Well, if my program I've loved since I was a kid is being all a bit grown up, then that makes me feel grown up. I still have that. I still have that feeling, but I also completely understand those who say the Doctor wielding a gun and all the sort of macho-y dialogue in this is a bit, it's misunderstanding what the charm of Doctor Who is. For me, though, the charm of Doctor Who is that you can have a story, set in a village with eccentric war game reenactors and a big face in a church one week, and then a story set on a future Earth colony where people get sucked under the ground the next week, and then the week after that you can have with giant woodlices sucking people underground, and the next week you can have a sort of grim and gritty thing about mercenaries helping Daleks replace people with duplicates. I mean, there's a lot going on, isn't there, in this story? I mean, there's, for a story that's essentially an action adventure that's really all about I'm not sure that's the best bit of Resurrection of the Daleks, and I think Leslie Grantham's great, and he's got a great face, and he's good, he's good supporting villainy, but I think his equally humane in Your Revenge is a little bit it's a little bit well enunciated and enjoyed for a character that's just supposed to be this sort of taken over technician type. I think Rula Lenska's great in this. She her character spends stuff. She gets annoyed with Mercer, who is a bit of a dick, and that's, and I think Jim Findlay sort of plays up to that. But he is probably the most, he's probably the most traditionally heroic character in it, really. But he is a bit of a dick. Which is an interesting dynamic, and I quite like the fact that Styles actually is slightly impatient with his Saywoodisms. I like the way Philip McGough does this as well. When she goes, "You're right." He goes, "Yep, stay there." I like all of that, and any bit where somebody does that bit with a gun makes me feel, whoa, that's what I want to do when I'm an actor. I want to do that with a gun. And again, this is, you kind of felt, and because McGough again was a sort of recognizable face, you're sort of going, they're not going to kill these guys off already. And of course, because we now know that these characters, come back as duplicates, so they're still in it. But it's pretty harsh that we meet these characters this episode, because it's only one episode, because they've been edited together, and both lovely Sergeant Calder and nice Colonel Archer, both dead by the end, which I think is a real shame. I'm never quite sure about Daleks saying exterminate a lot, but I know it's because you've got one camera and you can't move it, and your other cameras are somewhere else, and you've got to buy yourself a bit of time. But there we go. So here they go. So the duplication, but I mean that's a bit of a I can see why they've done it. Why they go, well, we've got to show that the duplicates aren't them. But if you're duplicating Philip McGough's Sergeant Calder, why have you duplicated him not wearing the augmentations that he's done to his costume. I suppose maybe because they based them and actually where have they got the design from? Because I mean they've literally only just killed him. So how did they know to duplicate them? Have they duplicated them from Colonel Archer's brain print? Anyway, try not to think about it. But, they've given Archer his gun back. They've taken off Calder's webbing and giving him a more traditional army costume, which is, of course, the clue for the other characters were the way that they're behaving. I mean, she's already said that's not Colonel Archer. So there's actually, there's no subterfuge here. It's more that you need Chloe Ashcroft and Janet Fielding to be held prisoner by somebody, so you may as well use the same actors, because that helps with the storytelling and helps when you need to do a thing with a small cast. But Del's brilliant. Look, having been lovely, very nice, very easy, charismatic Colonel Archer, to now be cold, intense, and he could do cold, intense death, even though he was actually quite a shy, as I say, self-deprecating, humble sort of fella. He also did have and I've since spoken to many people who knew him in his heyday. But note that he's credited above Maurice Colborne in this. And Maurice Colborne was a well-known actor at this stage. Del was well known. He's in Peckinpah, Straw Dogs. He's in Brannigan with John Wayne. He's in one of those films, anyway. No, not with John Wayne. Anyway, let's not. You can look him up on IMDb. So here we go. This is the twist: is that lovely, sad Rodney Bewes, who has an earring, which I remember also thinking was quite cool because it's odd how it goes into slow-mo as well at the end. I thought for a while that the cliffhanger was the next bit where the Daleks come out and say exterminate before they get interrupted by Lytton, and that had been a contrived cliffhanger with the close-up of Davison having to be slowed down in order for them to have time to put the sting over it. But I'm sure on the 4-part version that remains the normal cliffhanger. So maybe I just made that up. And I can't remember if that Australian version I had that as the cliffhanger or not. I still think it had the one that we know. So there we go. It's my guilty. It's my guilty pleasure. I went through it, and it hadn't been. And then after I'd done that documentary with Ed, and because I'd got to know the 5 actors, Roger Davenport, William Slay, Del Henney, Jim Findlay, and Les Grantham. We went to see Les Grantham at the theatre in Birmingham, and he was all right. And David Warwick was in that as well as because he was doing Dad's Army. He was doing Dad's Army, the play, playing Private Walker, and it was just after he'd been back to EastEnders and then been fired because he'd been caught. Because he'd called Pauline Fowler a wanker on Zoom, basically. I don't think it was a precursor of Zoom, and I think done a bit of phone sex or whatever, sucked his finger at somebody and been rude about his co-stars, and so they decided, after years of resisting going back to EastEnders, had finally gone, all right, I'll go back, and probably thought, and I've chosen the right time and I'll stick around now, and then got caught doing that and then got killed off for the second time. Having been really sort of killed off the first time. So it was already stretching credibility, and then they stretched credibility for such a short-term gain. It was one of those real sort of shame things that really didn't end up doing anybody any good. Weird to think that he's gone now. Good Lord. And Del sadly no longer with us. Oh, that was a shame. But we sort of stayed in touch, but we didn't meet up the last couple of times we'd wanted to meet up because Del had been quite poorly. And he lived in London, but he had a base in Cambridge as well, and I think he was spending more and more time there. Oh dear, I'm rather sad about that. I have gathered together a sort of tribute that I've written for him with, and I got messages from all sorts of people: Stephen Burkoff, Stephen Greif, who himself is no longer with us, Daniel Ryan, Neil Anthony, some really good people, and Dell's daughter Stella, and I still haven't quite put it together because it was time when you could write things, but nobody writes things anymore. We do it as podcasts now. Now, if I was doing that, I would have asked them all to record it into a voice, and I'd have just, pieced it together and done it that way. But it's all written, which takes much more sort of doing. Anyway, that's something that I will do and put on my website or blog or somewhere. So, I mean, I've got to be really careful with this one because it's one that I have so many sort of personal ins with. I've got to be really careful not to just go, I'm going to choose these people, what I like. But what am I? Well, I think, and because this is 2 50-minute episodes, we're choosing 2 things from episode 1, 2 things from episode 2, and then a bonus thing. Now, normally I would have chosen 1 from the first 25 minutes and 1 from the second 25 minutes, but that's not the rule here because this is a feature-length episode. So I don't, Ed is not necessarily constrained to have to choose 1 thing from the original episode 1 and 1 thing from the original episode 2. So let me think. Well, I like the sort of the hard edge that it is given by that sort of confluence of Saward and Matthew Robinson, the melty faces, the guns with silencers, that opening scene of the guys getting gunned down, the fact that it's policemen. I mean, Saward seemed to me to be on a crusade to do all the sorts of things the show had either done in the past and got into trouble for, or not even been allowed to do. So you have, he knew that the show had got into trouble for auton policemen. So now you have policemen with silencers. There's something about a silencer that makes it somehow more deadly. I think it's because it's so sneaky, because you can go up to somebody and shoot them and get away with it. I remember the first time I saw a silencer and it was in a grown-up drama, and saying, what is that? And my brother's going, oh yeah, that's a silencer. And you sort of, you just go, and because it sort of takes away the bang and the kick and the noise, it seems so much more sort of cruel and deadly and sort of ninja-like, even though you are essentially still blowing somebody's head off or whatever. But because of the way that it issues the bullet and kills people sort of almost silently, makes it seem somehow, I don't know, crueler, sneakier, bloodier, more dangerous, more like a snake-like, it's like a viper that comes and bites you. Don't write in if vipers can't bite you. So, yeah, whatever that edge that Matthew Robinson and Eric Saward bring to it, I like, that was what really, really thrilled and excited me as a kid. And I think it's encapsulated by that opening scene. So if Ed chooses that, I'm having that. And the gloom and the atmosphere that Robinson gives it, I think is entirely in keeping with the hard edged nature of Saward's script, with its with those the hunt for the mutant and the gunfire and the sort of unrelenting body count. There's a continual body count, and that also involves sort of melting faces and all of that. So all of that, which goes against even what I in other moments I think is what Doctor Who is, which is a cheerful, zesty fantasy. The fact that this exists as something, and the fact that this and Earthshock were successful, I think then causes Doctor Who problems down the line, because then Saward tries to do that a lot, and you get to season 22, which I know turns a lot of people off. And I, as I say, I quite like season 22 for the reasons I'm outlining about this. But I know a lot of people who make a very good case for season 22 being, a low point in Doctor Who and the architect of its hiatus and eventual demise, because Saward was so interested in doing, Doctor Who's version of Peckinpah, and that was a misunderstanding of what the show is. And all those cases are made very, very, very convincingly to me. But I also like watching fake policemen gunning down people on in a rainy London back street, and I like watching people's hands melt, and it because made the 10-year-olds of me feel totally grown up without actually corrupting me or scaring me or giving me psychological issues. So there's anything that makes me feel like I'm watching a grown-up show. Even now at 49, going, I mean, I suppose it's doing. When I was 10, it was because I wanted to feel more grown up. Now that I'm 49, it's because maybe I need to excuse to myself the fact that I'm still watching something that was designed for children in 1984. Oh, phooey! I don't care. I am what I am. So that's number one. And number two. Oh, screw it! I'm going to choose the army guys. I'm going to choose Del Henney and Philip McGough. But I like the army guys. I like the fact that they don't play them as your cliched. All right, sir, I'm the sergeant, and yes, hello, I'm Colonel Archer. That they bring them down and just make them much more believable in it. And as I say, the other approach is fine and works very, very well within Doctor Who. But these guys are so refreshing as a result and seem so much more real and so much more sort of reliable and sort of stoical and heroic in that way, but heroic in a more sort of understated and much more relatable and human. And sort of down to earth sort of way, that it makes their deaths. I mean, I remember at the end of the episode sort of going, well, yeah, but you didn't see Sergeant Calder die, so maybe I was kind of holding out that they might. You didn't see Colonel Archer die, he just had the gun held to his head. So because you can't really have killed them because they were great, they were really nice, and they actually don't have that much screen time either. So I love them. But there's all sorts of other things I could have chosen. I love the little subplot that Snake Gupta has. I love the fact that I love the fact that she has a fag. Although I think that they're trying to do that alien thing of making the spaceship a bit knackered and everyone on it a bit pissed off because they're not people in space. They're people just doing a job. All of that, which is again, this is Saywood's bringing that into it as well. So he's sometimes, although he goes a bit too far with the violence and stuff, maybe doesn't quite understand how to work the Doctor into the stories. The motive behind some of that stuff, where you can see it's where it comes from, where the inspiration from Alien and all that sort of thing, but working that into Doctor Who is perfectly acceptable and in fact laudable, and I like all of that and refreshing, and I think that's a much better approach to space. So all of that's great as well. So I could have chosen that. I could have chosen the scene where they look for the Dalek, which I rather like. There's plenty that I like about this, even though every single reservation that everybody has about this story, I totally understand. I know why people don't approve of pineapple on pizza. I used to work in an Italian restaurant, and when people used to ask for pineapple on pizza, or hello, can I have an Hawaiian? No, why have I given them that accent? Because I'm a snob. But it was usually people with an accent like that who asked for a Hawaiian. I would go, I'm sorry, madam, we are an Italian restaurant. We were a Cafe Uno. We weren't bloody, we weren't high end. And I would be totally snobby with anybody that asked for pineapple on pizza. And I really like pineapple on pizza. I like sweet and sour. And so, I can sort of get why people disapprove of something. I could even be snobbish about it myself. But if I'm perfectly honest with myself, some of the things that I might even disapprove of with one part of my brain, I absolutely gobble up with another part. So Resurrection of the Daleks is full of pineapple, and I love stuffing that hot pineapple in my mouth. Even though in polite company I would be terribly disapproving. That's a bit how I am about Resurrection of the Daleks. Although, as I say, I don't approve of the idea. I don't agree with the idea of a guilty pleasure. But what it's more, and I'm not saying that. I'm more saying I understand the people who find this objectionable. And they make perfectly. I had a chat with somebody the other day actually on the phone, and it's about a piece of work that I'm working on. Who is somebody not of my political persuasion, who made a very strong case for Doctor Who as a sort of product of right wing ideology and an Edwardian adventurer whose Britishness is part of his core, and this is very much a Doctor Who is a he person because this person doesn't like the new series at all, and I loved listening to him. It's really intelligent, really forthright, really intellectual, knows his Doctor Who, but is also an academic and writer and brilliant opinion piece, right? A very intelligent man. who said loads of things that I found hard to disagree with, even though in my heart, I disagree with them, in my head and in his argument. And I was invigorated listening to this person saying loads of stuff that, as I say, and he really doesn't like the new series at all, which I love, New Who. But the case that he made, I could sort of understand everything that he said in his case, and I really enjoyed hearing him make his case. It's an old-fashioned thing that I was listening to an opinion I didn't necessarily agree with, but I appreciated the opinion and how it was enunciated, and it was done so in a way with conviction and intelligence, and I completely loved listening to it and hearing it, and completely agreed with everything he said, except I don't agree with it. As I said, part of my head absolutely took it all on board and went, yes, those are very sound points, but the other part of my head, which is attached to my heart, went, yeah, but this is what I like, and this is what I think, and although what A, B, C, D, and E that you said about the new series, I could see why all those arguments make sense. I still actually think D, E, F, G, H, and I instead, or I mean, I don't think that makes, but you know what I mean. Because I'm thinking with a part of my brain that is attached that does more than sum up an intellectual argument, if you like, because so much of what I like about Doctor Who is indefinable, or is led by, not necessarily by logic. Perhaps that's it. When I was talking to this guy, it wasn't the Daleks and the Movellans, two creatures of logic at an impasse. It was a person of great logic and intellect talking to somebody who's a fluffy lovey, who's led by his heart and his tastes and the aesthetics. In that I can like something even if intellectually I don't or disapprove of it. I think it's really interesting. So yeah, I think Resurrection is very emblematic of that, how something can be really good and exciting Doctor Who, whilst also maybe perhaps not really being what Doctor Who should be or works best as, and yet it's a story I go back to time and time again. It's like my Sunday afternoon story, like some films are Sunday afternoon. Tremors, The Great Escape, Back to the Future. I think of there are certain stories that I like to watch on a Sunday afternoon to sort of exciting but cozy, thrilling, but not too taxing. And Resurrection is very much that. And it's one of the Doctor Who stories I've watched the most. It's also one that I would watch quite a lot when I came home, well-oiled after a gig. But again, that was particularly, I think, after I'd made the documentary with Ed, and I did have some guilt about Del, and I wanted to sort of watch it in order to kind of, I don't know, rationalise that, exorcise that, feel that, I don't know, whatever. But I certainly watched it a lot after we made that documentary. But as I say, all was well with Del in the end, and we ended up being, we go out drinking quite often, and he was always a bit shy, and it always took him a little time to. But I remember the sort of rosy-cheeked smile he got after he'd had a couple of bottles of Bombardier, and then the stories flowed, and he became quite the raconteur. But then at the end, he sort of, he put his anorak back on and shuffled off home. I'm very lucky to have known these people, but he was very much a contrast to the often sort of big characters, big, quite imposing, often quite scary characters he plays. He was a good actor. Right. What has Ed chosen? So I've chosen those two things. The military Del, Philip McGough, those characters, the feel of them, and the synthesis of Saward and Robinson that gives it this sort of dark, edgy, slightly violent, slightly cynical, but, it's got touches of Aliens, it's got touches of Peckinpah, it's got, where's is those influences, but they're influences that, feel like they're making Doctor Who go up a notch a little bit from something that can, that perhaps was a little pedestrian at the time, or a little sort of sciencey and thoughtfully, and going, actually, we can do action adventure, and we can do stuff that's a bit sort of tough and gritty and flinty, Let's see what Ed says.
So, Resurrection of the Daleks is 2 long episodes. I suppose it's probably more commonly these days watched in 4 episodes because it's watched on a DVD, but I watched it in its original form, the only form in which it's been broadcast on the BBC, which is in 2 episodes. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is a strange thing when you ask people to be positive about Doctor Who, because what I'm going to be positive about is the fact that it's also negative, that it's got such a doom-laden, grim atmosphere in it. But I really like that, and it's very much the kind of Doctor Who that I like to see. Not necessarily really miserable and doom-laden, but dark. And there's an atmosphere to it, particularly in the first 5 or 10 minutes. The desolate setting of Shad Thames, which would look nothing like that now. Actually, right now it probably would look like that again because of the virus, but until this time last year it would have looked nothing like that. But the setting was absolutely perfect to create this kind of slightly tense and unpleasant atmosphere, which is not easy to do. It's even more difficult to do when you're in the studio, and I'll come to one of the reasons why that succeeds and one of my other reasons for liking the show. But the atmosphere meant that you felt always that the characters were in jeopardy. There was real jeopardy. And of course you hear the cloister bell, which I found very exciting as a child, because I hadn't heard it since I was very, very young. I mean, of course it was only 2 or 3 years since Legopolis, but when you're 12, 3 years is an awful long time. And so I remember that the cloister bell meant real trouble. There was certainly something about that era, and there still is, which resonates with me. And maybe it's because I'm not a great lover of sort of high fantasy, if you like. I don't really like that many sci-fi shows. There are lots of sci-fi shows from the 70s and 80s which I have desperately tried to get into but can't. I can't watch UFO, I can't watch Space 1999, I can't watch the original Star Trek series. I did like Blake 7, but I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, and I'm much more into drama serials which have more of a sort of real life grounding, if you like. And so I think that was what Eric Saward was trying to do in his time, probably because he wasn't much of a science fiction fan. And of course there were some times when he was more successful than others than achieving it. And we're supposed to be talking about the positive, so I won't talk about the plot of Resurrection of the Daleks, which definitely isn't its greatest strength. It doesn't have an inspiring or a hugely imaginative storyline, which I accept. But for me, Doctor Who was about 2 things. It was about how exciting and how imaginative and how much the story took you away to a world of the imagination, which it often did. But it was also a question of whether you could believe what you were watching. Resurrection of the Daleks and many of the serials of this period, you could believe what you were watching, and you could believe that the Doctor was in trouble, and that was always important to me. I think Matthew Robinson, the director, was a big part of that. I wouldn't say he was one of the very best directors to have worked on the show, but he was certainly one of the better directors to work on the show. That was something that he perhaps brought to it. This whole sort of atmosphere gets better when the soldiers become androids later on, and they don't become nasty, of course, because they're just robots. They just have jobs to do. But the way that it's played creates this kind of sort of faceless threat, I suppose. All roads seem to lead to disaster, and while that sounds like a strange positive thing to say, that's how I think Doctor Who should be. I think it's very difficult to believe that the Doctor's in any trouble if you don't have that, and I think too often Doctor Who didn't, and Resurrection of the Daleks does, and that's one of the reasons why I like it. So that's my first reason.
Well, I mean, I think I might get a point for that. I mean, if it's a photo finish, I don't think that'll get me over the line. So, if the result is too close to call, I think I would probably have to maybe only give myself half a point. But if this is the only glimmer of hope I get, I'm going to give myself a whole one, because I think we were kind of getting to the same place about how this is in terms of the high stakes and the grimness, and I hesitate to use the word adult, but I think you know what I mean. And the same with gritty. When we apply both of those things to Doctor Who, context is everything, and they're not as as adult and as gritty as, you know, something that might have been on Channel 4 at 11 o'clock at night, where adult and gritty are two very different things. And although I fear, having invoked the soldiers as he did as well there, he might have wrapped both of my first episode choices into one. So that means maybe I do get a whole point, but that doesn't give me much hope for the rest. I suppose it's actually one where you could. I think it's sometimes lazy to do the cast. I would only ever do the cast in exceptional circumstances, and I actually think because I don't think it's 100% brilliant performances. I think some of the performances people are hard on are actually, I can see where they're coming from, and I'm sympathetic towards them. But no, it does mean that, yeah, there are stronger performances and there are weaker performances. Whereas if I were to invoke the cast, I would want everybody to be really, really good. Which is why, again, I think I selected Del. But I also think, Rula Lenska is really good. She does a lot with that character who never meets the Doctor, ridiculously, except for the photo call. But anyway, let's not get into that. But she is really good. She's got a real authority and a real, she's very good at the terse cynicism and the downbeat. She's on a suicide mission, and she does it with grim determination. And as I say, I like the way she is with Mercer. But anyway, I'm sure we'll talk about that. What is Ed's? But I was thinking, I wonder if Ed will choose the cast, but I'm not sure that he will, because I think there are weak links in it. And one of those is the main guest turn, which I feel sorry for Rodney Buse saying it, because I think he could be an interesting performer, and I'm never averse to casting against type. I'm never averse to casting actors well known for comedy parts in straight parts in Doctor Who. I think that can actually help, because the dissonance there, you have a scary crack in the wall or a scary statue or a scary gas mask. Having somebody well known for a sitcom suddenly doing scary space stuff can suddenly, it's the familiar in a different light. That's all part of the dissonance and the often strange, unsettling juxtaposition of the familiar and the scary, the comfortable, the familiar and the unfamiliar, the comfortable and the scary. The sitcom actor in Space Fatigues is all part of that, and when it works, I know William Gaunt is more than a sitcom actor, but he was, that's what he's well known to for most, sort of casual TV viewers. Clive Swift again. There's lots of examples of actors well known for their comedy work coming in and absolutely blowing it out of the water when they come to Doctor Who. I don't sadly feel, despite his best efforts, that Buse does that. Anyway, second thing, Fred.
The second thing I like about it, and this could really apply to either of the two episodes, but I'm going to put it in part one, because there's more warehouse stuff in part one, and that is the set design, which I think is a very, very underrated factor in the success or failure of Doctor Who in the original run. Of course, not today, because it's inexcusable for anything not to look great in today's language in terms of set design. But in the old days, that was not the case. The serial is set, there's a reasonable amount of film material outdoors, but the serial is set largely in two places. And firstly, the warehouse absolutely looks like it is a warehouse. If you had taken the video cameras into those buildings in Shed Thames, I can absolutely believe that is what they would have looked like inside. And again, that was not always the case. And it just helps you create a real sense of place and an ability to suspend your disbelief in what you're watching. And I wasn't aware of that when I was a 12-year-old or 11-year-old when I watched it first time. But that's certainly something that strikes me now. The spaceship sets as well are, pretty competent. Certainly as good as you're ever going to get for Doctor Who on a futuristic set, which was very difficult for them to do on the money that they had. But I think that the Eternal White, which they used a few times on Doctor Who, this time as successfully as ever when they appear from the time corridor, for example. Very simple, and works very well. No fancy effect which they couldn't do. A very simple effect which is very effective. The set design is one of the important things which creates that sense of belief in what you're watching. Too often in Doctor Who it wasn't there. It's very much there in Resurrection of the Daleks. And, there might be the occasional bit of balsa wood flying around when there's an explosion, but that's, par for the course. So, yeah, set design, which I think is, as I say, a very important part of the original series of Doctor Who, and not recognised often enough as such, is my second positive about Resurrection of the Daleks.
Yes. I did mention that particularly when Rodney Bewes and William Slay went indoors after that first film sequence, and yes, the sympathetic sort of transition between outside and inside is a testament to the art direction, the production design, and obviously a lot of thought has gone into that. And as Ed says, not always in Doctor Who and indeed a television at that time is enough effort made to rationalise the interiors with the exteriors, and that is a very strong point. And I do think that warehouse set in particular is very good. And actually, I think about it, the low ceilings in the Dalek spaceships and stuff. I think it's because I'm of the visuals. I don't like the sort of Dalek head guns. I think that's a I could sort of see why somebody might think that was a good idea, in the same way that at the end of that documentary Ed and I make, we didn't have an ending, and I came up with this brilliant idea at the end and went, why don't I do this? And I did a sort of monologue bringing all the strands together that by mentioning Genesis, Destiny, Resurrection, Revelation, and it seemed to me a great way of tying it all together. And it was brilliant because we were stuck for an idea. We had to do something there and then. Had to do it in a couple of takes. We needed an end to the film. Blah 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 blah. So did it. Brilliant. Sorted that. And then a few reviews came out. I remember, I'm sure John Williams, who's a friend of mine, but he was a bit scathing. He said, I was waiting for you to say, and they all did it on the same planet, but not on the same day, whatever. And yeah, that link will be the death of me. Do you know what? It seemed when you're in something and you do something, seems like a good idea, and then, even the next day, I think it took me longer than the next day, but now I go, what was I thinking? That's awful, and I hate everything. And I think it's probably a really good documentary. But that hangs. No, it is a good documentary, especially for the time that we had, and the reason that Ed did it like that was because of the budget and the time that we had, and it's right up my street because it's looking at the acting profession as a whole. I actually wish I'd got in armed with a bit better knowledge than I had in some places. I didn't ask Del about Fallen Hero, which was a big series that he did, which, and I've since discovered, I think he got a bit demanding on. Barry Stanton, his friend who was co-star on it, told me, and that led to the series not carrying on. But it was a big series that got Del actually quite a lot of attention, but it's largely forgotten now. It's quite an unlucky. He was quite an unlucky character in it. It's quite a grim show. But also Brannigan, I've just looked up Brannigan. Actually, it's John Wayne. Well, I drank with Del a few times and chatted. I never asked him about working with John Wayne. What an idiot! And didn't mention that. I mentioned the Peckinpah stuff in Del's interview, and I think I'd gone in thinking that was going to take up so much of it because Straw Dogs was such a cause célèbre. And Del actually went, well, I didn't like Peckinpah that much, and that sort of slightly disarmed me. But that was sort of Del as well. Sort of instead of going, yes, I know, I was in the Peckinpah film. He kind of undercut it and was a bit half empty glass about it. And so that I remember that sort of putting me off slightly off my stride slightly. So yeah, there are things I would like to do differently about that documentary. But bear in mind, it was also only the second one that I'd done, and the first one was a sort of funny bit of frippery about robots of death. So, but it's about actors and about the acting profession. But I'm sure I'd do a better job now. But that's no reflection on Ed, who always makes good films. That's a reflection on me. But I still think for what it was and the time that it was and the budget that we had and what the documentary landscape was at the time, it's good. No, it's good. And I'm glad we did it, and it's a showcase for those 5 individuals, which I think is sound and good. But why was I saying that? Oh, because the Dalek hats, that they grab by the ice talk to take them off. I understand why they might come up with that and go, well, Dalek troopers should have hats that are a bit like Daleks, so that they're like sort of human Daleks sort of thing. I understand the rationalization behind that. And the guns have a certain continuity. The Dalek troopers' guns are the sort of long rifle versions of the spaceship people guns, which are the shorter ones, which basically have those lights at the end and those sound effects, because they are much easier to do than lasers. But that makes me a bit down on the design of the story, because I don't like the aesthetic of those things particularly. I don't think they ever quite worked, which means I probably lumped the set design in with all of that. But Ed talking about it there, no, it's more of the futuristic aesthetic is the bit that I don't really think works. But that's in terms of the sort of humanoid costuming, really. Whereas actually the design there is really strong. So apologies. Apologies up until today, where I've sort of, because as I say, when I was talking about that boom microphone that nearly came into shot, that's because partially because Maurice Colburn is ducking his head down, because they've kind of paid attention to the fact that a human might not just be able to stroll through a Dalek spaceship, and so they, again, and you can see the ceiling in places in the spaceship, and I think that is quite ambitious and quite visually bold, and an attempt to do something different. So yeah, the design is very good, and I've never perhaps paid it the heed that I should have done, because I was put off by the sort of the costuming side of things. So John Anderson, designer, please forgive me, because actually I think Ed is right. You've done a splendid job there, and it's to John Anderson's credit that the story has some of the atmosphere that he does. And he comes back, of course, for the first 4 parts of Trial of a Time Lord as well. So sorry, John Anderson, who I don't actually know anything about. I don't know if he's ever been interviewed. But I think the design of the warehouse and the low ceilings in the spaceship are to be hugely commended. So I'll take that, Ed, even though I didn't choose it. Well, this has been a long one, hasn't it? So I hope you enjoyed that. I will return for the second part of my guilty pleasure. There's no such thing. Next time. And in the meantime, if you didn't like this, well, your bile would be better be directed at other podcasts. No, that doesn't make sense. Oh, sorry, I'm off for a glass of cool spring mountain water. Ta-ta. Well, hello, everybody. Or, go, it's you. I hate everything. Sorry, I'm trying to be in Eric Saywood's world. Well, greetings. It's episode 2 of Resurrection of the Daleks. A reminder that I'm watching these as the BBC decreed back in the day, the broadcast version of this story, which is 2 episodes long, 2 feature-length episodes long, which is annoying for me, because obviously if I do 4 episodes, that fits me in 4 25-minute episodes. That still gives me 4 podcast slots and enables me to relax and go on holiday and sip a pina colada on the beach. But instead I'm doing this as 2, which only fits 2 slots. They're longer, but it doesn't make any difference, because it still counts as 1 slot, which is kind of what it was all about back in the day, because of scheduling, because of the Olympics. It meant it was easier for them to fill 2 longer slots than 4 shorter ones. So there we go. So it's always felt a bit filmic, this, to me, and the contents as well. Can you imagine if Planet of Fire was 2 50-minute episodes? Oh, dearie me. It's the fact that it's the Dalek story of the year, and it's the one where, there's death upon death is piled on. It does seem to fit the extended episodes a bit better. So let's see how we do with my lovely friend Ed Stradling, who I don't see enough, but with whom I've spent many an exciting time in Doctor Who events and beyond, and professional times as well. But let's see how we're going to do as we press play in 3, 2, 1. So here we go. It's a resurrection of the Daleks, continuing the theme of Genesis, then Destiny. I suppose if the classic series had gone on, they would have had to have got increasingly desperate in their choices of biblical names to choose. I still think, Remembrance is an appropriate name, I suppose, because it's something that they left behind. It's just not a word that is really bandied about in everyday conversation, is it? Anyway, that's okay. Yeah, so there is a sort of ceiling thing going on with this in this Dalek spaceship. I always think in things set in spaceships these days, I don't think you could ever land on an alien spaceship or space station without some sort of alarm going off. Do you know what I mean? It does seem to be a sort of place where you can turn up and wander around and there's no security cameras and nobody picks you up. I mean, you'd have to be more artful in the way that you deployed your characters these days, I think. So we've got the twist that Stein is a Dalek agent. So, see, this is where I'm sure somebody told me once that the end of the episode was the exterminate, and it's it was stopped by the interruption of Lytton. Although that's a wonderfully cliched Doctor Who get out of that, isn't it? Kill, 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 kill. No, wait, we need to do X, Y, Z first. Oh, that's an interesting shot. The Dalek going straight up to the camera. Anyway, yeah, Stein being a Dalek I've never really noticed that before. That's an interesting move, unusual that it sort of goes to the side and goes right up to the camera to do its business, and then we cut away from it and see what's going on here. Stein, but when he was on his own, he looked sort of rather worried and fretful and was sort of still playing the part. And maybe he's a method agent. Maybe he's a Stanislavski. Maybe, but it does seem to sort of not quite make sense of the twists. Of course, have to be a shock. I quite like the way that she goes again. Again, it's very kind of Saywoody, and on paper, Tolo's question is annoying companion speak, and so actually to respond in that way is quite good. Although Mark Strickson's very good at all of that sort of stuff. Lovely Del. Chloe Ashcroft, who actually doesn't look quite like she did in Play School. Ambulance. I can never get over the way she says ambulance. But she didn't wear glasses, I don't think, when she was in Play School. Yeah, it was a mistake to give him his give the duplicate his gun, seeing as he'd made a point of leaving it for the Doctor. But that is televisual shorthand, isn't it? For we've programmed our androids or whatever the duplicates are badly. It does pile on quite a few plots, doesn't it? Oh, there they are. So that's all our nice characters dead. So they've. So I suppose Del and Philip and everybody would have had to come into that set just to do that, and not got all their stuff done on the days that they're filming in here. Yeah, of course they do. So the duplicates actually don't get them very far, having them as the soldiers. They're kind of given away almost immediately, but that's okay. It's a way of saving actors, isn't it, and still keeping up the jeopardy. Oh yes, and this is sort of I always think this is a bit sad for these two Daleks, but of course, that's the nature of them. They're not sentimental about individuals. A ship with a self-destruct. I always thought, I went through a phase of thinking, that's silly. Why would you have a self-destruct? But of course, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. You scuttle a ship, don't you, in the sea if you've been overtaken by pirates, or if you've got a cargo you don't want to. There is a reason to sort of. But if there's no escape, sort of thing, to take yourself down and take the buggers with you. So I used to sort of mock the idea of a self-destruct thing. Why have we got this thing that's sole purpose is to be hijacked and used to overcome us? But actually, it's more defensive than that, isn't it? But it is also a bit of a sci-fi cliche, isn't it? The old self-destruct system. Look, he's got an earring. I do quite like that. I know lots of people have earrings these days, but in the 80s it was I remember the old schoolyard thing of going, oh yeah, if you've got an earring in a particular ear, it means you're gay. And I would sort of go, how does that work? Do you become gay if they pierce that ear, or will they somehow refuse to pierce the ear of somebody who goes into the ear piercing place and doesn't have a gay certificate? But of course, it was just a silly schoolyard thing, as a comic friend of mine said. Well, no, I don't think I can do that joke. It's before the watershed, but it's basically where I come from. If you're gay, it's because and then says something a bit gayer than having an earring. But there we go. It's amazing how being gay was a sort of schoolyard slur, wasn't it? I think that was turning around even when I was at school, though, because I remember saying, well, if I am gay, it's not an insult, is it? And if you're not gay, if I'm not gay, well, you're just wrong. Did one of those bodies move behind them then? So I remember us even rejecting it then, but it still, it was still bandied about, and at university, I remember, people would still sort of say, that's a bit gay or whatever. Oh, they do it in Aliens of London, don't they? But things have changed. And that's okay. That's, words that have ramifications and connotations for people get eased out of the language or reappropriated or whatever. Anyway, let's not get into all of that. Why did I start talking? Oh, it's because an earring. It's because an earring meant you were gay. I mean, it's simple stuff, isn't it? Yay, well done, Del. There's nothing else to say about Del, really, other than I really like the change he makes from, affable, slightly avuncular soldier type to cold killer. Yes, this guy, he doesn't get any lines, does he? But he gets quite a lot to do. I seem to recall he does quite a shocked look on his face. He's the chemist, isn't he? I think Leslie Grantham does look very good with his slick back hair, and you can see why he got cast later as he does. Oh yes, he got cast later as Dirty Den in EastEnders, and had various ups and downs with his career. Now Lindsay Turner, she's the crew lady. She's called Xena, but she just gets credited as crew member. I think again you sort of say, can I get credited as Xena, not crew member? But she, I think I saw her interviewed in Doctor Who magazine for a very small little cutout interview. We actually I did find her for Ed when we were considering that documentary, but again he went slightly higher up the cast list for his for his documentary. So yeah, these guys are slightly stuffed, really. Styles, she's not going to style it out. There's a lot of bubble wrap, isn't there, in the Dalek? It's nice that they've given Doctor something comfortable to lie on. So I think it's very well directed, this story. It does pile plot on after plot after plot, doesn't it? We've got the duplicates going to Gallifrey to assassinate the High Council. So we've got haven't we got Tegan and Turlough are in the cupboards here, aren't they? I'm still not quite sure how the duplicates work or what they are. The speed with which the soldiers in the warehouse got duplicated was astonishing. So they're a product of the genetic engineering. So what happened to the original? So it seems an odd thing to do. So you make another one of a person, but it does have that person's thoughts and memories and blah de blah de blah. In which case you say, well, why don't you just take over the actual person? Because if it's just a piece of genetic engineering which makes another person, and if it's not a person, what's the advantage of it not being a person? I don't quite get it, but it does make for that nice thing of going, well, we've got scarier versions of characters that we liked, but it's not hugely clear, is it? I don't think it matters. I don't think it's a problem. I'm just musing on it because, as I say, I've never quite got to grips with the mechanics of it, if you like. The logic of it is slightly unfair to say because I don't think it really matters. What we know is there are, the duplicates have vestiges of the actual person, which can be appealed to if they're like Stein, and the duplicates are also scarier versions of people that we did know and like Sergeant Calder and Colonel Archer. We attack on. I always admire the optimism of they mined the corridor. It's not even a corridor. We attack on two fronts, i.e., this door here and this panel a hand span away. You can imagine when you're writing that. I suspect what what Saywood might have conjured in his head was a slightly larger battleground. But this is a good set. It's nicely lit, and all of this fluid camera work. Oh no, he doesn't tell you how it's done. See the Dalek. I mean, I can see why. I mean, it looks quite fun with that trooper next to the Dalek with his Dalek gun hat. But I can see why. I just don't go. So here's Tegan and Turlough, because we're now going to have the big revelation that sort of goes nowhere. He's very good, Mark Strickson, even when he's sort of lying zombie-like. He's. I remember when Planet of Fire was on. I remember thinking, I'm sure we saw his arm in Resurrection of the Daleks, and he didn't have the triangle. But you don't really, do you? Oh, he's very good at that sort of thing, Davison. I mean, he's lying there. He can't move his head much. And he has to shout no, which can be quite pony when you do it. He's really good at that sort of things. I don't think I've mentioned Davison much with this. I think Davison is superb. He never does a duff moment, actually, as the Doctor. And I think Mark Strickson is brilliant. He's, even though he's now on the side of the Angels, we know he's not trying to kill the Doctor anymore. He has that, he's got that great sort of conspiratorial whisper thing that he does, which is sort of often dripping with irony or, dourness. He's a great character, Turlough, and I think Mark Strickson plays him really well. I think he keeps it interesting. I think he's got a wonderful enigmatic quality about him, which Mark Strickson in real life, who I have done things with, but I don't know particularly well. But he's actually much more sort of expressive and cheery, and he's sort of he's less mysterious, really. I guess he's playing mysterious, of course he is. But I think the decision to do what they did with Turlough makes for a much more interesting dynamic in the TARDIS. and I think could have been sustained a little bit longer, actually, that you've got this slightly shifty character, but it certainly works, and I think is an underrated element of 80s Who, actually. Turlough, the fact that they go, how do we make the TARDIS dynamic more interesting? I would very much like a thing in my chair that you just inject people with that makes them do as they tell you. I mean, I suppose if he'd stayed there long enough, he could have eventually converted everybody. Lovely shot there. This, and look at that broken glass, and everything there is really good. Oh, and I like the lighting in here. I like the fact that the bit where the Supreme Dalek lives, and I think it's quite small because everything in here is filmed relatively close, but it's a differentiated lighting, and of course the Supreme Dalek means that the whole thing has a slightly different color scheme because of his different get up. So that's, I like those little cutaways to there. I think this is one of the least successful scenes in the whole thing. Poor old Chloe Ashcroft having to act, whatever discombobulation occurs because of because the dematerialization of the Magellan virus. But it's not one of the more successful scenes, I would say. But it's so hard to do that sort of stuff, and especially when you're limited in your camera angles and you get a chance to do it once and all of that. But all of that, yeah. So that kind of, you will go to Gallifrey. It's sort of like, I think it's getting to the point in the series now. You think, well, if we mention something from the continuity, that is somehow more important. So we'll mention Gallifrey, and Davison will do a flawless no, and it will. And I remember when I saw it, not the first time, but when I got it on video and saw it again, going, oh, I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, that's really exciting. But it's actually not that exciting. And he's doing his best here, Rodney Bewes, but it's a really hard ask, and it doesn't quite work. It's not great, but what can you do with that? Especially when you have his sort of slightly flat vocal tone. All of this stuff is great. Look how wonderfully shot this is. And even though it looks quite a reasonable day there with the sun shining, it's the brickwork, the film stock. It's this film stock that seems to have lend something a much more grown-up atmosphere. It's because the programs made on film tended to be the grown-up ones, but it leads to that. Even though it's outside and they're quite big open spaces, it gives it a sort of grim urban feel, sort of back streets and dodgy corners and all of that, even though again it's quite open. Oh yeah, he's gonna. Oh yes, one of these. I think the man with the moustache here is a very 80s looking man. He could easily be behind somebody performing on Top of the Pops in a sort of I imagine him sort of with just a leather waistcoat on, doing some thumb dancing, oh dear. Oh, she has to do the screaming stuff now as well, doesn't she? Yeah, I mean, she's not doing anything wrong there, but again, it just doesn't quite work. I remember that's one I said, because I think I remember when I watched this as a kid. It was all pretty full on grim, pretty flawless, and then when I came to revisit it when I was a bit older, some of it frayed slightly around the edges because there are some moments that don't quite work. But I'm now more generously inclined towards it. I remember thinking, my brother coming in and watching this bit, and me thinking, oh, he's going to love this because it's pretty grim, because she's running from policemen with silencers. It's beautifully filmed. Look at the angle on that. This is pretty deadly. And they're going to kill this innocent bystander, and you think, oh, this is an amazing, that's really grim. And my brother just went, why was he doing metal detecting in the water? And I was like, that didn't even occur to me to be a thing that you would criticise. That I think that is the difference between people who watch telly in the way that I, and I'm sure a lot of you watch the telly, people that watch. I mean, surely it takes an effort to sort of always be on the lookout to go, well, why did they do that? I mean, you sort of go, well, I could sort of, I know what I sort of think is important to the storytelling, and I might question something that is a flaw in the logic of, you know, the main thrust of the storytelling. But you know, it's like looking at a Christmas tree and going, you know, well, you know, why is the wiring of the lights like that? I mean, I don't know. That's not a very good. That's actually a really, well, no, it is. It's like looking at anything sort of beautiful and wonderful. I'm not saying Resurrection of the Daleks is beautiful and wonderful, but you know what I mean. And sort of trying to question the mechanics of it. It's, you know, it's taking your eye off the ball. It really is. So this is, you know, this is pretty grim. You know, this is the second build guest star. I like the fact that lovely Xena gets to be the last survivor who you think, oh, is she going to get to do it? Because you know, again, in a more traditional way of doing it, you might have got Rula Lenska to be the one who nearly, you know, who's the last one to pull the thing. But you know, she gets killed as soon as they smash the door open. So that's your second build guest star gone, which is pretty short-lived of old Rula, who's now being dragged out. Rula, who has actually spent the night in this house, in the room directly above me. I might have mentioned that last time, because there was a football match going on and she couldn't get a room in Manchester, so she came to stay at ours. She's a very, very classy lady. It's funny because I'd already interviewed her. Oh yeah, this is grim as well. It's almost like they're going. It's unfortunate that she's had to do that screaming for the part, you know, in the previous scene. It's sort of like, you know, she's got now to do anything else. But actually, I love the sort of very casual way Del just sort of pulls his gun out and, you know, without much, you know, ceremony. You know, he doesn't, you know, he doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't dwell on it. He just rather coldly dispatches her. So this is where you know, we please the Doctor Who fans by showing old clips. This was the sort of stuff where, oh man, this is amazing. It's automatically a cut above the other Doctor Who stories this season because it's got a clip from old Doctor Who in it. Despite the best acting of the chemist extra there, that needle was not in that capsule. Anyway, I'm sure I lost track of something that I was talking about there. Rula Lenska? No, I think I've. Oh yeah, no, I'd met her. I'd interviewed her for Who's Round, and she'd sort of left Corrie by then, but then she came back in. And I'm still not entirely sure she knows if I'm the guy that interviewed her for Who's Round and has met her at another Doctor Who thing or two is the same guy who's Shirley's partner. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure she knows that because she's met me under two sets of entirely different circumstances on more than one occasion. But it's never like I've walked out of a Doctor Who convention with her and it you know, and talked to Cheryl Lee. Do you know what I mean? So or you know, we've been you know, she's been doing a day on Coronation Street and then come into a Doctor Who thing. So yeah, she might think there are two people who she's met who look quite similar. But yeah, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Now that Davros monologue, I remember, in fact, I think it was this episode, or certainly episode 3 on my bootleg VHS, that didn't have any sound effects or music. So, and the cliffhanger to it, that again, must have been artificially inserted, was he's got lots of fillings, hasn't he, Peter Davison? This is not one of Doctor Who's finest hours. Oh, I feel sorry for Rodney Bewes there. It can't be an impossible task. I'm sure there are some actors that could have pulled that off, but I'm afraid Rodney Bewes is not one of them. And I don't think he gives a sort of bad performance throughout, but I think certain things are beyond him. But yes, that Davros, once more my Daleks shall become the supreme beings. It's really odd watching it without the music, and it just goes to show how important some of that stuff, music and sound effects are when you watch an edit of a Doctor Who without the ambience or the punctuation given to it by music, particularly electronic music. I think in the 80s, when the sets can sound sort of wooden or clunky, or and don't have that sort of metallic clang or that depth of sound that a real building or room and environment does. That's an excellent set. I love the fact that he has to duck everywhere because it's a Dalek environment. It really does expose stuff when that music and those sound effects are stripped away, and that Davros climax. I mean, it's an odd one to have as a cliffhanger anyway, because it's like, oh, I've run out of 25 minutes. I just need Davros to shout now. Oh no, maybe that was the cliffhanger, because I'm watching the. I keep going. When's the actual episode going to finish? That is the cliffhanger, isn't it? See, this is the problem, because I've seen this in so many different ways. I had this version first, the two-parter, the off-air. No, that's what I watched first, but my first collected version of it was this Australian edit that certainly had the wrong episode 1 cliffhanger, release Davros. And then I thought maybe that the Davros monologue was an artificially inserted one, but it is actually the cliffhanger. Anyway, let's not get it. I love this bit, not because I think the Doctor should kill anybody, but because I think Davison absolutely sells it. It's a moment that doesn't go anywhere as it comes to it, but I think Saywood is wrong in his understanding of the Doctor, and in fact in Saywood's script. He shoots one of the guards. I remember talking to Saywood about this because I was at the commentary, and I think somebody else had the script and said, "Look what it says here." And Saywood goes, "Well, the Doctor is in violent situations, and sometimes in violent situations you have to be violent. I don't think gunning down a guard from behind or whatever is not, I think the Doctor." Taking a life when his own is threatened or under terrible circumstances or whatever, I probably wouldn't lose an awful lot of sleep about, but just offing some poor henchman, I'm not exactly sure is the Doctor's style. And now this is where I always get a bit bored when baddies turn on each other, but the whole setup of this is Davros and the Daleks working sort of counter to each other, and who's loyal to whom and whether they need him or not. So, but they tell him to kill. They tell Lytton to kill Davros, don't they? And then they say, "Now we'll kill Lytton because we don't need him anymore." And if you do too much of that, it makes you go, "Well, why would anybody ally themselves with them anyway?" But I suppose the Daleks have to be deadly. But then it undermines the people anyway. I always think it feels a little unimaginative to me. It's like 24 used to do it, where you get a good baddie and they go, "Well, they've been in 6 or 7 episodes. We need a baddie now. So we'll get a new baddie who'll just off the old baddie." I think Davison does this really, really well, and I actually really like it because, although in Saywood's version the Doctor is a bit more casual in his dispensing of other people, and actually not having that makes this hit harder. If you've just seen him zap a guard, you go, well, he doesn't think twice about taking a life. Whereas because it's the Doctor who doesn't, which is precisely the reason that the Doctor shouldn't be violent and directly take life elsewhere, because then if you want a moment like this to really land, and the get out of it, where he's perhaps almost too keen to believe Davros, but that means that he will then not do the thing that he thought he was going to do, which then opens up sort of things going, well, should the Doctor have more of the courage of his convictions and save a lot of lives by taking a life? I mean, this is all interesting stuff, which I do not accept. I think Davison is excellent in this. I like that face-off. I like the whole build-up to this moment. I wouldn't know what to do with an army. It's very good, because at the same, and I love the way that Terry uses his hand to sort of shrink back. It's very, very good. I think that whole sequence is very strong and may well be one of my favorited things. I am a great admirer also of camera tilt, grab the console, acting and camera work. It's a wonderful thing. And I like the way that Davros isn't craven and doesn't sort of beg for his life, but goes, "Come on, mate! If you were a real man, you'd have taken me down by now." And I think all of that does open up. Davros is quite right to an extent. Is it actually the more moral thing to do to do a thing that is beyond your values, taking a life, if it is for the greater good, but that you have to do it? I always felt that this was slightly. I remember at the time not being quite sure. Oh, that wall crumbled a bit behind him, but they are walls that seem a bit sort of jerry built and out of kits deliberately, so it's acceptable. Yeah, I think it's slightly botched, that, because we need there for the character development of Stein, we need him to drop his guard and mistake, well, not mistake, but sort of assert that troopers, his enemies, because he's now on the side of the Angels, are on his side, to which Mercer has to go to point out, no, they're the baddies, we're the goodies, which he has to say, even though you absolutely wouldn't under those circumstances. And then without the camera, because it was all one camera move, that he has to kill one of the guards. The guard then has to kill him, and then but Rodney Buse needs to be injured as well. So it's a bit of a Reservoir Dogs who killed Nice Guy Eddie, because one of the troopers has to shoot Mercer and Stein, and then Stein has to kill that trooper, and Mercer has to die, but he's miles away because he's at the sort of back of shot, because the troopers have entered, and we've got Stein at the front, and it's not cutting away because there's only one camera on it, which means poor old Jim Findlay, who's played a fairly unlikable character very well, gets, but who has managed to survive longer than some of the sort of bigger name guest stars. So good for him, and it's nice to see a prominent sort of hero role for an actor of color in Doctor Who at this time. So this is all good stuff, and he then gets this rather confusing death scene, and then Rodney Buse has got all these lines about, "I caused Mercer's death," but he sort of flubs them slightly. His diction's not great on them. So poor old Mercer gets kind of offed in a rather unspectacular fashion, I would say. He's a very distinctive looking man, this chemist, with his red hair and his glasses. So it means that even though he doesn't have any lines, he is, you do follow him through the story. And here we have the who can die for the longest competition. I think Dell and Philip McGough have been brilliant throughout this story, but I think they've had a little bit of a competition as to who can take the longest to die. Um, so he has a rush. Dell gives it some there and does that sort of disco death, and Philip, yeah, it's I wonder if there's a bit there of kind of it's Doctor Who, lads. Should we give it a go? Because and obviously the director has sort of wanted it to go Zap 1, Zap 2, Zap 3. And that's staged as well as it could be, actually, because again, lines like behind you, it wants to slightly give the idea that somebody is out, they've been outflanked by the Dalek while they were concentrating their fire, but it's size is against them, and I actually think that was not done not too badly. In fact, if you compare this to, I always think that death scream of that man sounds a bit like a musical instrument. It's almost like it's an oboe or something, including Lytton and his troopers. So now they've turned on Lytton as well. But I actually think the if you compare the warehouse battle to Warriors of the Deep, where everybody stands not very far from each other, and and little red glows are superimposed, and it's a bit static and a bit bright. I think there's a lot of camera movement. There's great use of the set. Oh, so it's a absolute bloody bloodbath, isn't it? But Leslie Grantham gets to nearly release the thing. So that's the end of Kiston. He's dead now. So there's the movement, extras dying all over the place. Yeah, they've. I think Matthew Robinson has orchestrated the action very well. And it's quite nice to see Lytton live to fight another day, even though he hasn't done that much, but he looks pretty cool in his police superintendent stuff. And Maurice Colborne is very good at the sort of cold villainy, and he's the sort of person you want in a show that can be a little bit campy at times. Somebody that's absolutely not messing about. I always appreciated those sorts of bad guys as a kid. That's not a sequence that's particularly stood the test of time. But let's state the obvious, because we have to say something, and we all look the same, so we need to differentiate ourselves for the viewers. And the lighting in here is very, very good. It is a really good set, this, actually. It's a shame Ed has chosen that, because John Anderson's done a magnificent job, and you really do feel that that's the inside of those Shad Thames buildings. I remember when we were filming the documentary, I had to materialise, didn't I, at the beginning, and I remember moving in too quickly, and Ed almost going, "Well, that's it, that's the end of the documentary," and I was just like, "Well, should we just do the shot again?" Because I think it was pointing up, and it had sort of panned down, and I got impatient and moved it before he gave me the signal. And instead of going, "No, go again," he got really sort of because Ed is quite sort of focused, and dare I say it, a little spectrumy, but I think it's a common trait amongst the fans of Doctor Who, and I include myself in that. We all tend to get a little fixated and probably not process frustration particularly well. Look at that. Boom. No tinsel, which is good. I think this final battle is extremely well orchestrated, actually. And again, look, he's got quite a lot of depth, and I quite like this bit where Lytton. That's the only interaction they have, isn't there? Oh, yes, says the Doctor in Attack of the Cybermen. Oh, I really misjudged that man, who the only time I met him was I was at the opposite end of a warehouse, and he tried to shoot me. But yes, I misjudged him. I'm still not sure he actually turns out to be that nice. But anyway, let's not get into this. Now, this is overdubbed, isn't it? If you watch Davros now, I don't think his lips move, because I think it was not clear what was happening in this scene. I think in the way that it was. I suppose you could say it's one of those rare instances of it's the character's thought in his head, which we don't have very often at all. We have it at the beginning of the Underwater Menace. The war chief does it, has a moment in the War Games. But yes, that scene, Davros went and opened. Essentially, if it hadn't had that piece of ADR where he goes, "My escape pod is prepared, and now for the Daleks," it would have just been opening a door and then holding one of those things. So I mean, it's simple, isn't it? A bit of it's just a bit of squirty foam, but it does the job. It reminds me though of the Victor Lewis Smith Dalek sketch, which I'm surprised ever got through. It was very puerile. I liked Victor Lewis Smith. He was, but he could be quite puerile. If you've not seen the Victor Lewis Smith Dalek sketches, I mean, I'm not going to do it for you, but it's basically extremely childish. Oh no, he tries to kill him twice. To be fair, so yes, he misjudges him based on 2 attempted murders this is very cool. I mean, so yeah, you didn't misjudge him, Doctor. He was an absolute prick. And it's very cool how he wipes his hat that he's just been carrying about with him, just in case. Always, when you're a galactic mercenary who is serving as the chief of the human troops of the marauding Dalek menace, just make sure you carry the hat part of your earthly disguise with you in case you need to make a sharp exit. I mean, it's fine, but it's very silly. And I remember being really worried here that, oh no, they can't kill Davros, but of course it's just affected his chair. It's fine. But and presumably, if we're to cut back to an hour and go, oh no, I'm all right, I could put my arm down now. But that's okay, because they do that, don't they? They lead you to believe that the villain is dead, so that then when he returns, it's a shock. And actually, he's pretty cool in Revelation. I quite like this, that you have the final bit where the Supreme Dalek survives for a start, but he sort of comes to taunt the Doctor. And they kind of leave it to go. Well, I suppose we're supposed to assume that the duplicates just kind of melt or get a stammer, or turn out not to be particularly good at acting in a turmoil, and people can spot them. But I quite like the negative ending where the Doctor doesn't entirely seem to, what victory he has is to sort of get out alive, essentially, and has every guest character bar Lytton has bought the farm. Look at that, there we go. So even though it's sort of ended with the Supreme Dalek taunting the Doctor, I always sort of think that comes after the explosion, but of course it doesn't, because he's on the ship. So that Dalek that has just been taunting the Doctor has just been blown up. So there is a victory for the good guys, but it manages to make it feel like that the Doctor has not won 100%. And this is a really grim note, and I think those 3 guys look great. I love the murderous policeman thing. That's Sayward. It is sort of cynical. Let's be disturbing. Let's rock. Let's. Again, I mentioned it last time, didn't I? Let's do that thing that they got in trouble for doing when my predecessors did it. And here we have Tegan's leaving scene, which I think is rather good. I think Janet Fielding is very good. I remember it felt very grown up. What did she say? A lot of good people have died today, which is very, very true. And of course, if any of us lived in 10 minutes of a Doctor Who adventure, we'd have post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of our lives. But I think it occasionally behoves the show to sort of say, this stuff that we take in our stride because it's an action adventure actually has a big emotional toll. I mean, again, I sort of think, if Maurice Colborne can carry his policeman's hat around with him even when he's doing battle, you would think Tegan would want to leave with a change of underpants, but no. She hasn't even got a coat. She hasn't even got a pair of tie. She's going to get very cold. She hasn't even got a bag. She's got nothing. Where's her? If she has got a purse or a wallet on her, it's not going to have space for much money. But there we go. I presumably, though, I suppose Auntie Vanessa's house will have shot up. If it's shot up anything like the properties in Shad Thames have shot up, she's probably going to be all right. But it's a nice Tegan's theme as well. The music is very good. It's one of the more notable sort of bits. And I like the fact she sort of comes back, because I felt at the time that the suggestion was there that she might have changed her mind, but missed too late because the Doctor doesn't hang about. You think he might have gone, yeah, tell her, let's just get out thermos and a cup of tea and sit here for 15 minutes in case she changes her mind. But no. Off. Okay, you're going? Okay, fine. Bye. And yes, Roger Davenport, playing Trooper, gets several different bits there where he's the Trooper in different places, but he too gets killed in one of those corridor gunfights. So they all go. So it's quite a death fest. But I remember, as a kid thinking that seemed very grown up. This was like Aliens. This was like the big sci-fi adventures or disaster movie films and all of those that did the stuff that Doctor Who didn't do or couldn't do. So I can see why Eric Saywood decided to sort of push this kind of atmosphere for season 22, and for having done Earthshock and having done Resurrection, and I think they were the stories that sort of floated his boat, and that the fans liked. I think Resurrection even beat Caves of Androzani, did it in the DWM series poll that year. Whereas Caves is obviously now one of considered to be one of the best stories of all time, and I don't think Resurrection is even close. So it's one of those stories that I think relies on its shock value first time, and probably is one of diminishing resources, diminishing returns once you've got over the initial wham bam, thank you ma'am. It's I can see why people might think it's slightly it piles on unnecessary bits of plot. It is a bit sort of macho and soulless and humorless. But I quite like that cynical feel. I quite like the fact that nobody makes it out alive, even though Warriors of the Deep had pretty much done that. You could see that Warriors of the Deep is kind of, Saywood would have liked it to have been a bit like Resurrection of the Daleks, but Warriors of the Deep is a similar sort of story. Everyone gets killed in that, but that looks much more like a not very good Doctor Who story. There's lots I love about Warriors of the Deep, but it is it's trying to be what Resurrection of the Daleks actually is, and so I like Resurrection. The kid in me wanted Doctor Who to be grown up. I wanted it to be the sort of thing my friends who were watching sort of more violent stuff, or were much more into stuff that had gun battles and fighting and all of that sort of thing. I wanted it to be all of that, and it's got good characters, which I like. It's got good actors doing good work. I think it is very well directed. A lot of the big moments don't actually go anywhere. The destruction of Gallifrey, the Doctor going in to kill Davros, but it does give it dramatic beats. And And yes, the ending to episode 3. I had this is how I'm getting old and senior. Going, I wonder where the ending to episode 3 is. It was where I said it was on what I was saying was it was a cobbled together version. It's just that I'm watching the 50-minute version, and I knew that. I mean, I introduced it saying that, and yet I still halfway through. To be fair, I am having to talk and watch at the same time. Anyway, so 2 things from this episode, and then 1 thing overall, isn't it? So, well, I like the I'm going to kill Davros and that face off. I like the Doctor saying that he's going to do it, and the companion's reaction of, oh my God, but you don't do that. I think it's very well played. I think it hits as dramatically as it's intended to, and it steps the story up a notch instead of, the Doctor and co being sort of passive players, caught up in the whirlwind of what's happening to everybody else. Suddenly the Doctor's being proactive in a way that's making him perhaps cross a moral line, and I think that is interesting. And then the face-off between him and Davros, I think is very interestingly written. I like the fact that Davros doesn't try and, beg for his life, but kind of, is cunning and manipulative, but also, points out the conflicting logic in the Doctor's own morality and owns his own. And Terry Malloy does that well, but I think Davison is excellent. Davison really carries off the I'm doing this, and it's about as close to the line as I've ever got, and I really feel the impact of that. So yeah, the Doctor deciding to kill Davros, which he doesn't do. So we're having our cake and eating it, which is perfect. And you could say, well, he never would have done it, but he tried, and perhaps he doesn't have that kind of braveness and has to do something else instead, or perhaps it's that you should just never kill. I think you can impose your own feeling upon it, but we get the moment, and he doesn't have to go through with it, and that's perfect for the setup of the show, and for the story. And the second thing, I think Tegan's leaving scene is good. It genuinely feels not like, oh, we're just a little bit sad. It feels like pretty grim. No, this has been hard. There is a consequence to these adventures, a real psychological consequence for an ordinary person, and sometimes you just have to tear yourself away and go. And she does, and we never see her again. Well, in fact, we did see her again very recently, as I record this, the latest episode of Doctor Who to be broadcast. Oh, who'd have thought all that time later? Never thought Janet Fielding would return when she wasn't even going to do Big Finish at one point. And she's great, and I do like Tegan. I do like her. I do like her outfits, sort of tie-dye explosions and leather skirts. Oh, I do like that bit where the policeman killed the man. Oh, well, that might be my bonus thing as well. So yeah, Tegan's departure and the Doctor killing Davros, or not, are my 2 things for that episode. And then I think my favourite thing overall is the fact that it's got a killer policeman in it, because I think they make for some really memorable scenes. 2 uncredited extras as well, Mike Braben and Mike Jeffries, I think they're called. And it just, they're menacing. I love that final shot where Lytton joins them and they just sort of go off and walk. I love the fact that they have silencers. That makes it even a bit creepier. And just, I love the fact that they don't chase her as well. They don't chase Tegan. There's that sort of inexorable thing. And they become slightly comedic figures for the last time we see them in episode 2 of Attack of the Cybermen. No, it's just they're only in episode 1 actually. Oh no, then we see them being converted, don't we? But for that last bit, there's a bit of that comic stuff with the put your hands up and the handcuffing, and they suddenly become they're much better as enigmatic sort of backgroundy presences, and that to me is the. I'd have probably chosen the design if Ed hadn't already chosen it for part one, maybe, and the sort of grim atmosphere, Saywood Robinson combo thing that I chose for episode one did take a lot of good things away. So I'm having to grasp at straws here because, well, no, I'm not grasping at straws. I think the murderous silent policeman speak to a lot of what the story is trying to do. I think, Saywood's trying to do something that the old production team got in trouble for. He's trying to mean that it ends on a sort of downbeat note rather than a cheerful one. And I think that's always good to shake the show up a bit and to do that, and to make it feel that victory is not entire and has come at a cost. But also it's the Yeti on your Lewin tooting Beck thing, isn't it? It's the making something every day scary, and I think and with great economy, 2 actors in policeman's uniform. Anything that's something you can get from stock that Doctor Who manages to make really terrifying, I think is the perfect use of the show's format and possibilities. If you can just get something out of a cupboard and make it deadly, I think you're doing Doctor Who properly. So the fact that Lytton and his chums are coppers, I think will be my bonus thing. So let's see what Ed Stradling has chosen for his 2 things from episode 2 and his bonus thing for the whole story.
So we'll move forward to part 2, and the other thing I like about it, and again, this might sound slightly strange to think of a positive, which is that pretty much everyone dies. Now, I'm not particularly a fan of people dying in the dramas I watch, but I am a fan of people dying in the dramas I watch when it's about Earth being attacked by all-powerful Dalek creatures who can wipe out large numbers of human beings at a stroke. Because everyone dying is what would happen in a serious situation like this. Of course it would, and the nobody dies or everybody lives should be the exception rather than the rule when you're taking your friends on a deadly dangerous tour around the universe. And throughout the whole story, really, there is a real threat of death hanging over everyone, and you can feel it. And also, because of what happened to Adric a couple of years previously, we now know that it could happen to Tegan, for example, or Turlo, who are again, you feel they're both in trouble, and they're alone as well for very long parts of the serial. They're alone and they're in trouble, and we're worried about them. The other thing was, I knew, because I wasn't a fan, I wasn't reading Doctor Who magazine, I was just watching and enjoying it. I knew Davison was leaving, but I didn't know when, so he could be going at any time. So this made it even more scary and frightening for me, because it could be the Doctor's last story. This could be the one where the Daleks kill him, and I didn't know. It wasn't until I saw in the Radio Times that it said, introducing Colin Baker. That's when I knew, it's this one that he's leaving, and I didn't know until then. So that was another thing which kind of made me slightly, fearful of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well put from Ed. And actually, if I thought about it properly, no, I really like the Davison saying, I'm going to kill Davros, because I'm assuming he's going to choose Tegan as the last thing. I could be wrong, but I just get the sense of that. But maybe I should have chosen as my bonus the fact that nearly everybody dies, because it did make it feel very grown up to me. Again, why, when I was a kid, did I want to feel grown up? All I want to do now, as I head towards 50, I was talking to Shez earlier today, and we realised that our dog Bernard is about to become 5, and we're both about to become 50. And she went, God, that means we've had him for a tenth of our lives. And I suddenly felt very small and short-lived. And I said, I don't want to die. Because as you get older, what is it? Life is wasted on the living, says the master in the TV movie. Childhood is wasted on children. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, and you always appreciate what you had if you don't have it anymore. But but the amount of time one spends fretting on the things one shouldn't fret on, or I mean, I was quite a sort of scared child. I think I was worried about getting into trouble. I was worried about the future. I was worried about all sorts. And now I think, oh, if only you'd enjoyed it a bit more. And maybe I think I enjoyed it less than I actually did, because I remember, moments of great excitement, largely, when I'd dived into a Doctor Who book or was looking forward to a Doctor Who thing. So I did have islands of solace, and they were all Doctor Who. They all had Doctor Who coconuts on them. I'm really not very good at metaphors, but I do look back. But perhaps that's the mistake I'm making. I'm looking back with regret rather than not worrying about that and concentrating on the here and now. But I did, as a kid, I was desperate for Doctor Who to be adult and to be grown up, and I think I was desperate to be grown up because it seemed to me that when you're grown up, that's when your troubles went away. Nobody could tell you off, nobody could bully you, nobody could tell you what to do, and you seem pretty cool and world wise and everything. You understood everything. And of course, I mean, because I think I've said this before, my brother's 6 years older than me, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, all I've got to do is get to 18 when I was 12, get to 18 like he is, and I'll be fine. And of course, you look at 18-year-olds now and you go, they don't know anything, they're children. But I was desperate for people to think my show was big and grown up and adult, and again, this sort of explains, I think, why Saywood went that way with the show. It was an instinct and a decision I was perfectly happy with in many ways. That was the stuff I liked about Doctor Who at the time. I can see now, as part of the whole sort of makeup of Doctor Who, and I have very good friends whose opinions I totally believe in, and follow and buy, and who absolutely hate that period of the show and think that season 22 in particular is the greatest aberration in the show's history, because it takes it from being fantastical and cozy and comfortable, and that's not in a pejorative way. Cozy and comfortable is how I found season 2 on my recent sort of revisit when the Blue-Grey came out, and I adored it. And the Pertwee era, the bits that I thought were shortcomings about the show, I now absolutely embrace and adore. I still like season 22 as well. I'm in a kind of like in everything mode these days, because maybe I'm getting old and trying to stop worrying, and I've realised I'm only headed in one direction, so I may as well smile as I'm heading that way. Certainly about things that aren't real, do you know what I mean, and out of my control, because they're all from the olden days in the past. So I may as well let them stand on their own 2 feet. But yeah, I can understand those people who reject the sort of Saywood model of what Doctor Who should of what Doctor Who should be. And I certainly think, actually, as I say, from speaking to him, and that slightly odd defence that he has, well, it's violent situation, so you're going to have to react violently. Well, no, if you're somebody else, I think one of the keys to the Doctor is and I know he nearly brains a caveman in the very first story, and I know he disintegrates an Ogron, but generally, I think, the thrust of the character seems to be that if he can avoid bloodshed, he will, whereas Saywood would have had him shooting a guard in cold blood, So, I think there is a sort of misunderstanding of the character there. A misunderstanding of the tone of the show by having it so grim and gritty and violent comparatively. Well, I don't know, because as I say, as a kid, I lapped that up. And as a kid, this was the most exciting bit of Doctor Who. This and Caves were the highlights. I was much more into that than I was into, men in shorts walking around a sandy planet, or the sort of, 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 the sort of you know, slow wander around, monsters and people standing 5 foot away from each other in one wide shot on a brightly lit underground base set, pointing torches at each other. I was much more when it was trying to be peck and pa. That's what I was after, because I suppose I was starting to watch and be exposed to sort of grown up films. My brothers would bring back films that were, or we'd see, stay up later. We were always allowed to watch sort of adult, for want of a better word, content. I mean, I'm talking like grown up movies. I'm not talking about they weren't sticking on Debbie Does Dallas. I've never seen Debbie Does Dallas. Whenever Shirley says what do you want to watch at home, I always go Debbie Does Dallas. I think one day it would be quite funny if I actually got it as a joke, but I don't know if it's is it a really naughty film? I think I don't want. I'm not gonna. But she said one day she said one day I'm gonna call your bluff and get it for you. And I thought, well, one day I'll call her bluff and I'll get it for her. But I don't know. But I'm presuming it's a proper, not like Confessions of a Window Cleaner, which is has naughty bits in, but they're not ready for action, and no actual action occurs between the players. But is Debbie Does Dallas? Why am I talking about Debbie Does Dallas? I can't remember. But anyway, it is a joke in our house that's gone on for far too long and is probably really boring. But whenever she says, what should we watch? I go, Debbie Does Dallas. But I don't actually know what. I've never actually seen Debbie Does Dallas. Have any of the viewers and listeners, the listeners to Happy Times and Places, have you ever been taken to a happy time or a place like Dallas when Debbie's doing it? I hope. Do I hope you haven't? Well, I don't know. People could do what they want. But anyway, this is not the Debbie Does Dallas podcast. Could you imagine doing a podcast like this on a porn movie? Well, my favourite thing about that was when he did that on her face. Oh no, I can't believe I even said that. Well, there we go. Let's leave that there, because it's not really my cup of tea. I'm much more of a children's television program man myself. Anyway, so because it's not really let's not get into why all that's not really my cup of tea. But on my brief bits of exposure, I just think it's a bit Sayward, and people aren't very nice to each other. And I think with most of the things they get up to in those sorts of films, they should be very nice to each other indeed. But anyway, let's get on to Ed before I give you my very naive guide to naughty movies. Anyway, Ed Stradling's second favourite. So I can understand the death and the fact that everyone dies being one of the most attractive things about it. I err that way as well, but I can also totally understand why that makes some people who like sort of crazy, daft, imaginative, fun Doctor Who might find that that leaves a nasty taste in their mouth, and it's not what they come to the show for. So, both of those things. Right, Ed.
And the other thing I'll talk about is the departure of Tegan, because when she leaves, again, it's a bit more real. She's pissed off. She's seen all these nice people die. You can believe that this is the one where she thought, oh my God, this is the reality of what I'm doing, travelling around with this guy. I'm just watching people die all the time. It's almost like I didn't really believe this was true in the previous 25 serials that I've been in, because, it didn't seem quite so real. This one seemed real, and that's why I'm going. And it almost feels like that to me, watching it. Seen lots of good people die, very lucky not to die herself. Normally the companion sees all those deaths, and the next following Saturday we've forgotten all about it, and then we wonder why no girls watched Doctor Who in 1984. It's different this time. She knows that the Doctor didn't want that, and so she's conflicted, and it's not a happy goodbye, but she decides that it's over. And I again think that's kind of a bit more believable than we saw in most Doctor Who companions' departures, and for me was more moving as a result of that. Others might feel differently, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good choice because it's my choice. And yes, the fact that it is more believable than the usual companion exit, it does seem a little bit hurried, but they make a virtue of the hurriedness. It's her making a snap decision based on the fact that it's one of those Doctor Who stories in which everybody dies. I mean, she could have left at the Awakening, stayed with her grandfather, couldn't she? She thought, no, I'll wait until I'm miles away from any relatives, and I've left the scene of a crime. Who did the cleanup of that? I mean, yeah, her forensics going to be all over it as well. Anyway, so a lot of bodies to dispose of by the British authorities. I think nowadays you'd probably, blow that building up so at least the corpses would be incinerated. But that's just kind of left for somebody to clear up. I suppose a unit would do it, and it would be Official Secrets Act and all of that. But yes, the nature of it, it makes a virtue of some of the necessary compromises that the format imposes upon a companion exit, a regular's exit, and does it very well. Unlike Ed, I knew Tegan was leaving, but I remember being quite surprised as we got to the end and she hadn't sort of shown a sign of doing so, because I'd got the Radio Times 20th anniversary. Did that say when Tegan and Turner were going to leave? Something, I think. I knew that when both of the companions were going to leave, and I knew that the Doctor was going in caves. So I was ahead of Ed. I wasn't a regular purchaser of Doctor Who magazine because we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and you got a copy every now and again if you were lucky, or if somebody gave me one or whatever. But I did have the Radio Times 20th anniversary special, one of the greatest pieces of Doctor Who merchandise ever produced, that and Doctor Who A Celebration. I very much credit with making me a Doctor Who fan. I read them over and over and over again. Wonderful things, beautifully illustrated, and just a door to Narnia. And I think it was in that it told me when Tegan and Turlough were leaving, but if not, something else at around that time. So I knew she was going, and I knew, unlike Ed, that the Doctor was going to survive this. But you could see why you might not. You could see why you thought he might regenerate. I mean, he's even lying down, on the couch. It's a perfect place to regenerate. So yeah, it feels like a really momentous story, even though the only really momentous thing that happens is that Tegan leaves. But it feels like a more important and more epic tale than everything else in that season, apart from Caves of Androzani. Even though it's not that dissimilar in terms of its ambitions of storytelling to Warriors of the Deep, which are both sort of high casualty action adventures. But it feels more epic and certainly more polished than that. And obviously it feels more dark and gritty than Planet of Fire or The Awakening. And Frontios is a curious beast that is entirely different. I'm a huge fan of Frontios. I was slightly nonplussed by it as a kid, but now I think it's one of the stronger Davison stories that's only really scuppered by the Tractators. I think they drag its reputation under a little bit. But anyway, we will do Frontiers. I've got a lovely guest doing Frontiers. He hasn't recorded it yet, though. Paul Scoons from Down Under. But he's claimed it, and I look forward to what he has to say on it. But in the meantime, if you want to hear what I think of Frontios, you can listen to Joe Ford's Hamster with a Blunt Penknife. I think the first one I did with him was Frontios. And that's a lovely podcast hosted by a lovely man. And I've just done a 3-part interview with him. Why anybody would want to listen to that, I've no idea. But it's available should you be a masochist or need a cure for insomnia. Now, Ed, he says to the people who are listening to this, which is currently an hour and 20 minutes long. So, Ed's final thing, his bonus thing, to cover the whole story. My policeman thing, I think it was probably going to go nowhere. I think for my bonus, I should have chosen Everybody Died, and I'd have got a point there, because actually I've got 2 points. Hang on, I got a point for Tegan. I got a point for episode 1, the grimness and all of that. So actually, if he does choose the policeman, I have won. I'm not going to win, am I? I'm not going to win. Oh, if I'd known it had been this close, I would have perhaps thought better, or would I? Who knows?
And I also have to choose a bonus item, which is not related to any of the episodes, and that's going to be for the regular cast, the 3 regulars, who I think are terrific throughout their time together, actually. I mean, I don't know how many serials they did, just the 3 of them. I suppose it would have been starting from Enlightenment through to this one. All of the serials that they're in, they give, consistently believable performances. I'm not suggesting that it was the greatest, doctor-companion relationship as written. I don't think it was particularly. But I think in terms of consistency of performance, those 3 were really very good pretty much all the time. I found their performance consistently convincing. Strixon has a kind of real slightly understated, you never quite know whether he's enjoying himself or not. Janet Fielding as Tegan, I think her performances generally is a bit underrated over the years that she was in the show, and I think again, the dynamic between the 3 of them worked pretty well in that they are kind of slightly cranky with each other. That's how people behave when they become very familiar with each other. So that's my bonus point is for the 3 regulars, who I think were terrific.
Yeah, I buy that. I think that's a flaw of what I do when I do these is that I kind of sorry, that was my music playing on to the next track, which is Dominic Glynn's Doctor Who remixes was the next track along in my music library after Ed. So anyway, I think that's a good choice, and I mean I think I kind of acknowledged Davison in the whole Davros confrontation thing. I think that the reason it is as successful as it is he is a big part of that, the main part of that, the essential part of that. And I mentioned, I don't think he ever has even a Duff moment, let alone a Duff, story or scene as the Doctor. But I think Ed's quite right. I think Janet Fielding does take a while to get right, and I think she's slightly overwrought occasionally in some of her earlier performances, or her overwrougtness is not contained enough to be convincing performance-wise. It could be slightly awkward in places, and again, that's partially because of the restrictions of the way this stuff is filmed and the pros arts nature of multi-camera, etc. But I think by this point, I mean, and earlier than this point, but by this point, she's regularly knocking it out of the park. And I loved Tegan as a kid, and I like the fact that there's an edge to her. I agree, and actually, what he talks about with the dynamic, again, it's a bit like the violent stories with guns and gruesome deaths that he totally piles on Eric Saywood, next season. Kind of, the Doctor and Perry always arguing with each other is kind of taking the crankiness that Ed celebrates here as being refreshingly real. That it's not all sweetness and light, and that there's a bit of an edge to everybody's discourse and interaction, which can make it realistic, and which makes the dynamic perhaps easier to be engaged by, and then goes too far with it, because I think occasionally you want the Doctor and Perry to stop arguing, and actually a lot of their arguments are sort of quite childish in the writing as well, whereas the edge here does seem an attempt to make it a bit more sort of palatable to a more cynical grown-up audience, and again, that kind of appeals when you're a kid, and sort of when you're if you're an eavesdropping adult. And Mark Strickson is great, and yes, that shifty quality that he has, that he's always pretty tense, he's always on edge. As I say, even that sort of I'm going to get my face on the camera thing does mean that he's sort of always alert and looking backwards, and it helps to keep the pace and keep the atmosphere and keep everything sort of edgy and dangerous. And I think yeah. So the three regulars do all do their different jobs very, very well, but work as a cohesive whole dynamic, and they're all very good. Again, I don't think any of them have a bad moment this season at all. And yeah, good choice, Ed. And I wish sometimes I could see the some of the staples of the show more clearly than trying to sort of drill into the sort of minutiae, and forget the bigger picture sometimes, because of course these shows would not have been successful at all were it not that some of the week in week out staples, and particularly the main cast, were not so compelling and watchable, because if you're not with them, it makes tuning every week a bit of a chore, and it never was. Even though Davison was not my favourite Doctor at all as a kid, I keep saying this, probably in my top three now, I would say. So there's something for coming back to this stuff and reappraising it. So yeah, it is a story that I enjoy a lot. Resurrection of the Daleks, Sunday afternoon disaster movie kind of thing. I was brought up on the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. Great big ensemble casts of characters, slowly but surely getting killed off one by one. So when Doctor Who did that, I was all for it. It's not going to win any awards for original plot or subtle metaphor or complex psychology, but I think it does what it sets out to do very well. I think Matthew Robinson does a terrific job of directing it. It's ambitious, and actually a lot of the stuff that he does, although he's sort of big bells and whistles and bangs and explosions, the fluidity of his camera work and the way that he works around some of those sets, and John Anderson's set design, which is superb, are all very strong. And it's got I think it has a feel all of its own, partially because it's in 2 feature-length episodes. It just makes it feel like it's something big and hefty and epic, even though it's the same length as any other Doctor Who story of around that time. So it hasn't stopped being fun, watching Resurrection of the Daleks, and it will never stop being fun, being a friend of Ed Stradling, who is a good guy, who I like very much. And it was nice to hear his voice there, because I don't get to speak to him often enough. So hello, Ed. Thanks for doing it. I'm glad you're my friend, and I hope you've enjoyed having his voice in your ears as well, because it's always nice to have a bit of Ed Stradling involved in your Doctor Who shenanigans. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and that you will join me once again next time that I attempt to watch some Doctor Who in happy times and places. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest this time around was Ed Stradling, who is behind the TV Museum, which you can support at patreon.com/The TV Museum. If you like my output, you'll love Ed's treasure trove of delights that he's found on tapes here, there and everywhere. I'm grateful to Ed as ever, and also to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Josh Bernard, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, Susie Ferguson, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galishaw, Paul Harris, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Ashley Knight, Joe Llewellyn, Ian K. McLachlan, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin and Roland Moore. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to become a patron, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where you get advance releases, You get exclusives, you get access to behind-the-scenes photos and footage from my DVD and Blu-ray extras. You also get a couple of your own podcasts, a monthly AMA, and a thing called Far Too Much Information, which is the sister podcast to Too Much Information. But even you get too much information earlier than the hoi polloi, the great unwashed in the worlds of Spotify and Apple Podcasts, who are sometimes 6 months behind you. And if you can do that, you can do it for as little as £3 a month, and you get everything at the lowest tier. It's very egalitarian, but it can go up as high as you like. If you want to throw your money at me, you can, but there are very few extra trinkets as you go up. Everything that's essential is there for the £3. You can also support these at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, where rather than being involved in a monthly subscription like you are on Patreon, you can just chuck a bit of money into my virtual hat if and when you are so inclined, which is a useful system too. But if you can do neither of those things, but you still want to lend your support, you can do so without spending a penny, but just giving me a little bit of your time by giving these a like, a subscribe, a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, and possibly a few lines of review as well, saying what you like about it. That stuff really, really does help in this battlefield that is the internet. Fight for attention, particularly in the Doctor Who universe. Any of those things would be much appreciated, but mostly keep listening, tell your friends, and thanks for being there. Of course, I'm a social media whore. I mean, I sometimes say I've learnt not to go looking for the validation of others. I said as much on Twitter at Toby Hadoke, at Hadoke Podcasts, Blue Sky at Toby Hadoke, and all those dots and whatever it is, but you'll find me there. On Facebook, I have a personal page which is closed off, but there is a page for me as a comedian where you get all my work. Basically, you just don't get to see pictures of my brother. And then there's what is the Instagram? I'm on that at toby.hadoke. And I think you probably just see me, strutting up and down a full-length window on some street, luring you in for trade, but needs to be done these days. I'm a self-employed artist, innit? So you can follow what I'm doing. Doesn't cost you anything, and hopefully it will now again brighten your day. So do all of those things. Click all the necessary buttons to make me feel worthwhile. The post-credits are going to be very brief on this one. There's a whole post-credits thing going on the current non-omnibus, the regular release of Happy Times and Places, which will be out, because this omnibus is one of the reasons I've done it, is to get something out for the non-patrons. So actually, this is going to be a rare one. You're going to get it at pretty much the same time as the patrons, because the patrons are far ahead with other stuff. And I realised I'd dropped the ball with you. I actually had a week off Spotify and Apple and all those others last week, simply because all the things I'd loaded up ready to go, I'd done it so in advance and then stopped in December when, of course, I was getting distracted doing so many other things. So if you're listening to this as it comes out, I hope you've been following my advent calendar. If you haven't, that's on all the socials. It's also on Patreon, and it's on the Patreon for free, so you can check it out there. So I'm afraid I've been spending most of December doing an advent calendar, and I'm now up at 122 when we've got people coming around tomorrow, and I've got to cook a pre-Christmas dinner for everybody, and none of it is prepared. But so anyway, Happy Christmas. This is topical. This will be out. Happy Christmas, but I will release it 2 minutes earlier for the patrons, I think. Maybe if I release this now for the patrons, then I go to bed, and then when I get up in the morning, I'll release this at some point on Saturday for the non-patrons. So the patrons get a few hours. That's worth £3, isn't it? But yeah, normal service will be resuming after Christmas, I think. I'm just editing this. I've got quite in the mood to watch Resurrection of the Daleks. I think it's rather fun. And in fact, here's an exclusive. I have seen Chris Chapman's making of documentary, because I get to watch all the documentaries before they go on the discs, just as a as a sort of peer review sort of thing, which is always a privilege, and it's great, and it's odd, isn't it, that it's finally, because it had the normal release, then it had the special edition, which is what mine and Ed's documentary is on, and now finally that it's come to Blu-ray, it's got a proper making of, which for such a sort of tub-thumping story with Daleks in it, you'd have thought it would have had an actual making of. And Chris actually manages to speak to a lot of the people that we didn't speak to for the one that mine and Ed did. So I love it when the range does that, when it goes, okay, we've got a few gaps to fill, let's fill those gaps. And so hurrah! Finally, Resurrection and there's some really good interviewees in it, actually, and they've got some fascinating things to say. A couple of whom certainly I'd never seen interviewed before. So well done, Chris. So there we go. That wasn't that short, was it? But there's a bit of an exclusive for you. The Resurrection of the Daleks documentary on the Season 1 Blu-ray, forthcoming Blu-ray set, is very good indeed.